marks, these circular grooves that we saw on the basalt block at Abu Sir, but it also seems to have been subjected to at least a two-stage machining process. The saw has been used to cut horizontally into the block as we're viewing it in this footage, and it left the same saw cut marks as we saw on the block at Abu Sir. However, it also has a machined lip that's been cut vertically into this cut surface, as if a very large circular saw or wheel was used to cut just a small amount out vertically, shown by this slight yet consistent concave arc to this second cut. This is a very complex mechanical signature. It's not something that could have been made with hand tools, and frankly it bends my mind a little bit trying to imagine just how this series of cuts were made. Christopher Dunn has made an excellent study of this block at Abu Rawash, along with the other evidence for mega machines in his book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. I plan to produce more detailed investigations into the specifics of these circular saw markings sometime in the future, and give it a treatment much like I have done for the tube drills, but my intent in this video is to cover a wide breadth of examples for high technology and to try to not get too lost in the details. Speaking of tube drills, or core drills, they're yet another example of machining marks that are not explainable by the tools or techniques in the archaeological record. Yet again, here we have evidence for advanced tools that seem to have cut through tough material like granite at a rate far greater than we could achieve even in modern times. And if you'd like some clarification of that claim, please do watch the documentary about it on my channel. There's a link below. I will add that we do see evidence for core drills or tube drills in other parts of the world, notably South America. Although not a common find, there are many examples of large core drill blocks and holes in the andesite and granite of structures like the Coricancha in Cusco. I've seen reports and images of holes drilled into stone from around the world, including some
OBS
in Europe,
fixed your
and I
shit.
think that all of these examples could benefit from LiDAR or hyperspectral imaging tests in order to help uncover their secrets. Even at Pumapunku, which is a site we'll get into in this second video, there are many examples of tiny little drill holes pushed into the andesite. These may not have been core drill holes, but they're remarkable in their precision and in their almost delicate placing nonetheless. At the other end of the scale, some of these tube drill diameters seem almost impossibly large, certainly way too large to even consider doing it by hand. Something like this incredible coffer that's housed in the Egyptian Museum, with 4 just massive tube drill holes drilled into it. These tube drills have also been used to make some very complex objects, like this one, which is a tube drill hole that's been drilled into a core from a larger tube drill, which is also housed in the museum. This block that's being shown by Yusuf Ayawan was, at least last time we saw it, located at Giza. It's another example of a hole drilled into a larger piece that may actually be something from another tube drill. But sadly, this block is now missing. It's no longer at Giza, at least we couldn't find it. And this is an all too common occurrence for evidence that doesn't really fit the mainstream narrative. Using manpower alone and manual hand tools like pounding stones or copper saws and chisels, it takes literally days of effort to grind away a very small amount of material in the very hard stone types like granite or diorite. Why then do we find clear evidence for overcuts in so many objects and slabs? We find these overcuts on the precision statues of ancient Egypt. You can find these overcuts under the arms or at the edge of the seat. You also tend to see tube drill holes drilled between the feet. There are other machining marks that seem to indicate some form of powerful industrial process was used to shape and finish the stone. One of the best examples is this remarkable slab tucked away in a corner at Abu Sir that has many such markings on it. Blades or saws have dipped into the material and then backed out, and cuts have been adjusted. I can only describe this block as having been machined. It's very flat, its corners and angles are very precise, and there are power tool markings all over it that seem almost delicate in their application. Even the end of this slab appears to have been cut through, and then you can see where the stone was broken away. And just look at the flatness of the surfaces and the sharpness of the angles. I really hope this slab is left where it is. It seems small enough that it could be relatively easily carried away, and I'm looking forward to examining it one more time when we visit Abu Sir again later this year. There's one other dimension to machining that I want to cover, and it's something that I've talked about before. That is the polishing or the finishing of precision-made stone objects. Once again, we're talking primarily about the boxes and the statues. In many cases, the stone has been worked to a point of reflecting light, which is not a natural characteristic for granodiorite or other hard stones. It needs to be worked extensively to get it to this point. There appears to be several stages of finishing that's required in order to get to this mirror-like finish.
Oh man.
And this process is best illustrated by the mighty single-piece boxes.
Good for
that
you,
are housed
man. Good
in
for
the
you
underground
to eat
catacombs
well.
of the Serapeum of Saqqara. While most of these giant 24 boxes have been finished to a almost mirror polish, there are several that show various stages of polishing, which makes the whole complex all the more remarkable because it indicates that this finishing work was likely done in situ, underground and in very tight quarters. This giant black granite box, one of the biggest boxes in the complex, complete with its massive lid, it's tucked away in a corner that's generally off limits to the public, and it has been precisely made but not quite finished, perhaps because it developed a large crack in the end here. This box shows the rough machining stage of work, which was then followed by a much finer process that then flattened the surface but didn't actually polish it.
It's
whatever.
Slow.
Slow.
Final.
Fin shaking nice,
See.
buddy.
First thing
Smooth.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, buddy.
So all you needed after this level is to smooth it and then.
That's amazing. Congrats, man.
This nearly polished stage of
That's
finishing
awesome.
can
Big smile,
also be
Ricky.
seen on the undersides of the lids of the other boxes or on other surfaces of the boxes that were never meant to be fully polished. And a careful examination reveals some very fine lines or some markings from some form of tool that must have been used at this stage.
Here also we have other machining, probably the latest layer. We saw how the rough machining reached a certain point. We have more machining here. Look at it here. Fine lines.
Congrats, man. That's great, dude.
You see little fine lines. You see it?
Yes.
That looks like the final process or the final stage of smoothing before they give it the shiny polish. So the shiny, and you see it here too.
Yeah, the big thing is just like the sugars, reducing sugar consumption, reducing like complete like I eat a bunch of cheeseburgers not at like 3 a.m. but because then your body would just turn
Lastly,
into
we
fat
have
like
the
also
actual
late at night.
polishing stage that brings
Eating
the
high
material
fat and
to the
high
point
sugar
of
late at night, just your body
reflecting
turns directly into
light.
fat.
Even while covered in dust, the perfect nature of the finish on these boxes.
So like I
really
eat a
is
lot of meat,
remarkable,
but I eat a lot of
particularly
meat,
in
I eat a
some
lot
of the
of eggs, I
interior
eat a lot of
spaces, which
salad.
appear to have been
I
polished
eat
almost perfectly.
zero
If you've
candy,
seen
zero
my Serapeum
chocolate,
series,
zero
you'll know that
muffin,
there is some
zero
astonishing evidence
Cokes,
that a
zero
liquid may have been
milkshakes.
used to achieve this finish. You can see the markings left by what appear to be liquid drops on the
like zero
underside of the
none,
lid here.
no cake, no birthday cake ever, no cake ever, no cookies ever.
So the liquid
I've been doing that for
leaks down here
4 years now.
and then forms these lines with drops.
Now, this isn't a varnish or a polish, at least as not as we know them.
And I'm able to
many
eat,
people
like,
have suggested this to me. That's
but I
what
don't
the
even
polish
want
is,
it, man.
Because these liquid pooling marks
No,
that
well,
are
one,
shown
I mean,
here,
no, because
they
it,
are
it just turns
noticeably
directly into
smoother
fat, man.
than the surrounding material.
Eating it, you just
This
the
is
result
not
is
a
just
process nor a
increased
chemical that
fat
we
on the
know of.
body,
Our granite blocks and the slabs that we use are
and it's
polished
not
with
like good for you,
mechanical
and you
devices
just
and
you
varying
end
levels
up you're
of
not
grit
wanting it
before
to
they're
taste
shipped
it,
to your
to
house
eat
and
it.
installed as a kitchen
I don't know if it's
counter.
like the taste buds change
Now,
or
the
desire
orthodox
changes. I
explanation
mean,
for
people are
this
different,
polishing
but
is, of course, cast in the light of
you
the
know, it
primitive
just turns
capabilities of
directly
the
into
ancient
fat.
Egyptians.
I see like
Academics claim that this
skateboarders
polishing
eating
was done
high
simply
sugar.
by rubbing sand
Come
and
on, man, I
rocks
hate
onto
this
the
fucking
surface.
game, dude.
While this seems fairly ridiculous, this might actually be
Microbiome,
possible
yeah,
technique
maybe.
for polishing a flat surface.
Probably.
Never mind how you got the
Also,
surface flat
yeah.
in the first place. But even if it took
For sure.
years to achieve, It just isn't
But even just
realistic when you consider the vast array
my
of
own ability
non-flat
to
surfaces. There are
decide
many
this is not
complex,
good for me.
irregular surfaces that are on these objects that have been polished
not a
just as well as the flat
I think it's
parts.
more
It's
a
not just the
mental
boxes
brain
that are
decision than
polished.
like a
We also
microbe
see a very fine degree of
decision. But
finishing
yeah, you're right
in
in
evidence
terms of
on
the
many
biological
statues.
response.
Plenty of these are housed today in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and many of them are made from types of stone that are even harder than granite. Note how every surface
Yeah,
is
so you need to
polished,
be
and
self-disciplined
in some cases,
in
the reflection of light
not
is
lying
used
to yourself.
emphasize features,
A
like
lot of the
rib
people I
cage on
see,
this statue,
especially
or
with
the
diets,
chest
they
of this
lie to
seated
themselves
figure.
like crazy. And I'm not
The
like
inside
judging.
of the fingernails are polished. The artistic lotus
I mean,
flower
nobody's
motif
perfect,
on the
but
side of the throne here is polished, and this polished finish, which when shown next to the writing, shows us one of the hugely obvious contradiction when it comes to the varying level of technologies that we observe in ancient Egypt. The technology
I eat a lot of like
reflected in
fatty
the
meats. I
writing
could be
on this
leaner. I
statue
could be a lot
does not
leaner. I could be
remotely
way
reflect
leaner.
the technology that was used to make the statue itself.
I could be.
It doesn't even come close.
And I eat a lot of like I eat
This is one of
burgers and
those
stuff,
things that once
cheeseburgers
you
and
see
shit.
it, you
That's what I'm
can't
saying.
easily unsee it because you start to notice it everywhere.
If you cut out
Glyphs carved into these
the
objects
sugars
display the
and the
signature and the
carbs,
marks that handheld chisels leave
you can
when
eat
used
pretty
on
much whatever you
stone in
want,
a
which is
manner like
amazing.
this. Compared to the object itself, the writing is generally always pretty rough work. The builders obviously had the ability to
It's,
polish any
well, I try to
surface
cut
at
all
any
the
angle,
fat
as
out.
I've just shown. Yet the
I try to cut
writings
it all
are
out.
never polished,
I
even
drain
in
it all.
large symbols with plenty of space.
I like to eat extra
Look
lean
at
ground
this
beef.
box, for example. Although it's heavily weathered, you can
not
still
too
see
expensive.
the light that reflects from its surface. Yet, despite it being utterly covered in hieroglyphs, you can
But
see
no,
the
you don't want
obvious
to. You try to
hand-tool
reduce all the
nature of
fats
the work and how the writings were made by chipping
sugars
away at the polished stone.
and oils.
Look at the writing on this box in the Serapeum. We've looked at it before.
No vegetable
But
oil,
I'd
no
like to make the
canola
point
oil,
that if
no.
the builders could make perfectly straight lines in the object itself,
'Cause
they
those
could make
things are
perfectly
just so
square
fatty.
corners like those seen on the interior. Why then couldn't they manage to draw a straight line on the outside of the box? The simplest answer is because the writing most
Yeah,
likely
man.
came later and was
That's
done
awesome,
by a
dude. I'm so happy.
civilization that lacked the same capability to work the stone.
Why we cannot accept it? Because of the perfection of machine. You cannot be the one who do this. The thing that would challenge the engineers today, and then you will be challenged just by adding the writings on. Especially that we have seen many good examples of dynastic Egyptians relief and deep relief and high relief superior writing. And we know the process of it and we know the tools. And in my opinion, as a stone carver and someone who's been studying this, I haven't seen really any writings in the hieroglyphics, even the best quality ones which I love so much, relief or high relief or deep relief, that reflects power tools. I have seen it in statues, in boxes, in slabs, but I haven't seen it yet in any writings. I know how it was done. It was done manually.
This is my friend Yusuf Aywan. He's a master stonemason, a chematologist, and the son of the legendary indigenous wisdom keeper Hakim El Aywan. And he's been studying these objects and ancient Egypt his entire life. He understands in a way that few do what it really takes to work in and carve stone, both by hand and with power tools, and he really knows what he's talking about. I greatly respect
Have
his
sleep, peace to you, Joe,
understanding
for sure,
of
man.
it,
Thanks, buddy.
and
Thanks for being
I
here,
agree
man.
with him when it
Thanks
comes
for being
to the
here.
technology level that we see
Congrats.
in the writing. There's some nuance here to explain. The dynastic Egyptian civilization lasted a very long time,
Congratulations.
many thousands of years. They eventually developed iron tools, and although this was long after the Old Kingdom, they certainly developed the ability to do very fine work into hard stone. I'd imagine that being a scribe or a stone carver and writing hieroglyphs was a lifelong trade and would have taken decades of training to become truly proficient. This proficiency in writing extended even to erasing old glyphs and replacing them. This process is well demonstrated by an example here at Tanis on this obelisk fragment. See how the bird glyph is being blended into the writing? I think that this is why Ramses II seems to have had his name on everything. Once he tagged it, it was his forever, and we still attribute endless statues and monuments to him, while I think the truth is more likely that he was just the last guy to write his name on something that was vastly more ancient. Undoubtedly, some of the carving that's been done into obelisks and statues is really excellent work. It looks very sharp and well defined, particularly on obelisks like this example at Karnak Temple. However, as Yusuf said, even with these examples, he knows how it was done, and it was done with hand tools. He's lived and travelled in Egypt his whole life, and he's never seen any writing that reflects machining or the use of power tools. We do, however, see this evidence on the objects themselves, on the boxes, on the slabs, on the columns, the obelisks, and on the statues. The writing is, without fail, always used to date the sites and to date the objects that are found on the sites, despite in many cases there being a huge disparity in technology levels. How could anyone say that these poorly made scratches into this incredible box at the Serapeum were made by the same people that made the box itself? Yet this is exactly how we date and relate this site and its objects.
Come on, why would
At
you
the
change
Serapeum,
guns like that?
This
Like,
box
come on,
is
game.
considered to be the most valuable because it has writing
So
on it.
fucking dumb.
I would prefer to call this what it is, a priceless, high technology, ancient object that was inherited and then vandalized with a chisel by a later and far less capable ancient culture. Maybe it's high time that we opened our eyes and used some of our own high technology capability in order to
double duck.
reevaluate these ancient places, so that we might get just a few steps closer to the truth. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 of this series will be the very next video that I produce, and in it we'll continue this investigation by taking a look at some of the logistics and construction methodologies around moving some of the really big, heavy stuff. We'll also take a look at what I think is the most convincing aspect of ancient high precision, ancient high technology, which is precision. We're going to get into all of the little vases, the symmetry in the stone vases, the columns, the boxes, the obelisks, the various aspects of precision that are both measurable and quite evident. In that video, I'll also give you my opinion on what it is that I think we're really looking at here when we look at all of this high technology and precision objects that are mixed up in kind of the rougher and less precise work from other ancient civilizations. I do want to take a minute to just say a huge thank you to everybody that does support the channel via the value for value model. It means a lot to me. It's the only reason that I'm able to take the time to make and edit these videos, whether you're doing that through Patreon, PayPal, Subscribestar. There's a bunch of ways that you can do it. They're all listed out on unchartedx.com/support. I also wanted to say a big thank you to Stephanie, channel patron Stephanie, for designing the new logo. I really dig it. I've put it on a bunch of new merchandise. I'm using it in the videos, as you can tell. And yeah, that's great. I'm not that talented in an artistic direction, so it was great to get some help there. Otherwise,
Why?
I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers. The study of ancient Egypt and of the history of human civilization itself is full of contradictions and mysteries. The remains of Egypt's ancient and mighty megalithic architecture feels almost otherworldly in today's modern times, and the more we discover about them, the more they seem to just tease us with their secrets. I want to tell you a story about one of these mysteries, about one of the verifiable signs of advanced technology that must have existed at some point in the distant past. This specific mystery has been investigated and debated for 150 years. It's been studied by pioneering explorers and gentlemen scholars, by mainstream Egyptologists and archaeologists, and it's certainly been investigated by independent researchers, the so-called alternative history authors of our own modern era. Yet despite all this investigation, despite all of our modern capabilities and our extreme capacity for understanding, we are still left with something we simply cannot explain from within our current version of
Why?
history. Nor is this something that we could even replicate accurately today. This ancient mystery is a clear indication of advanced technology, of a type that is unknown to us, and it has a signature that is currently beyond our own capabilities, which is what makes this story so astonishing. In this video, I'll show you the proof behind these claims. This is the controversy and the story of the mysterious tube drills from the Old Kingdom period of ancient Egypt. My name is Ben, and this
Oh,
is
we
my
don't get the
chart.
fucking. Come on,
If you've
YouTube.
watched
Like,
the
why?
content on my channel before, you'll know that I've mentioned these tube drills and their marks a few times in various videos about
We don't
ancient
get the
sites.
subtitles
I've always been
automatically
fascinated
put
by them and by
on the
other
auto
signs of
playlist.
advanced machining,
Like, why,
the
YouTube?
circular saw cuts or the machined surfaces, and by the precision objects that you can find across many of the ancient ruins and remains of Egypt. I plan on taking a dedicated look into each and all of these topics, and I'm starting with the tube drills. So if you stick with me to the conclusion
Like,
of
it's
this
just so
video,
dumb.
I think
You're
you'll find the
pissing
topic
me
of
off.
ancient tube drill machining to be just as remarkable as I do, and also find it to be convincing evidence of what can only be described as a lost ancient form of high technology. The story of the tube drills is one that stretches over 150 years, with many different explorers, scholars, and authors weighing in during that time. From the legendary William Flinders Petree's works of the late 1800s, to Egyptologist Mark Lehner's PBS special that aired on television, to university studies that used electron microscopes, and to the revolutionary publications of modern-day manufacturing engineer Christopher Dunn. These machining marks have been a hotly debated subject for quite a while now. I've reviewed and researched many of these arguments from both sides of the debate, and in the case of the tube drill marks, I believe that debate is now over. But before we get into those details, let's first understand exactly what it is that we're talking about. The phenomena of these ancient tube drill marks is something that can be found across many sites that are still left in Egypt. They're often found carved into these stone blocks or these stone slabs that are the remnants of megalithic architecture. Evidence for tube drill use is also found on various individual objects, usually ones that display other aspects of precision, like the many giant boxes that are carved from granite and other incredibly hard substances. Or they're found on the Old Kingdom statues. In many cases there is a tube drill mark between the feet of these statues, and many of these statues are found in museums all around the world. The use of tube drills is perhaps most notable though at some of the oldest of known ancient Egyptian sites,
double
the
duck.
Old Kingdom sites of Abu Sir and Abu Jarab, where there are many examples to be seen carved into blocks of granite or basalt. There are tube drill marks on and around the pyramids and objects at Giza. Cores from the drills
it's
have been
fucking game,
recovered here,
bro.
as well as at Saqqara and on an array of other ancient sites. The tube drill marks and the cores range in size from small, like these holes that are drilled into the lip of this box, right up to quite large, 12 to 14 inches even, as is shown in this just incredibly unique coffer or box that sits in a corner of the Cairo Museum with 4 just gigantic tube drill holes in it. Part of the mystery of these tube drills is that we most often see them worked into just some of the hardest materials on Earth, materials like granite or diorite or basalt or schist. This is not an exclusive trait though. There are some examples, much rarer than the examples we see into granite, but there are examples of tube drills that have been worked into softer stone, like alabaster or travertine, as shown here on the just beautiful alabaster hotep at Abu Jarab. There are a couple of aspects of ancient tube drilling that are quite important to understand, because both the debate over this topic and the evidence for the high technology really comes from these technical details. As the name implies, these were tube drills. They were not a solid drill bit. The drills themselves were hollow and quite thin, and you can see some evidence for just how thin they were by the lip that is left in some of the holes, like this amazing example which was made into basalt at Abu Sir. The tube drill action itself produces cores.
I had to not YOLO that 5th pause. I couldn't lose it again.
And this
I had to eat
material
that half
removal was,
second.
in
I
fact,
had
their
to.
primary purpose. Tube drills were used extensively for this purpose on many of the precision objects of ancient Egypt, in particular the boxes and the precision slabs, but also, as I said, on the statues. There's evidence to suggest that they were also one of the tools used to create the vast array of just astonishing stone vases, jars, and the delicate objects like the infamous schist disc that's here in the Cairo Museum. These small stone objects and jars are a notable mystery just all on their own. They're incredibly precise, and some of them would be very difficult for us to make even today. Yet most of them come to us from the very oldest of times in Egypt. Some 40,000 of them were found under the oldest pyramid of them all, the Step Pyramid of Joseph. So I guess you can just rack up yet another incredible achievement for the Old Kingdom. Some of these objects are admittedly from times before, like this incredible hollow tube of lapis lazuli, one of my favourite little things in the museum. It's actually labelled as pre-dynastic, and it's housed in a case next to some bone ornaments and some mud pottery. To me, it seems like just yet another contradiction in the story of history. This is yet another out-of-place object, just trying to escape notice. So we have tube drill holes on the sites and on objects, but we also have tube drill cores that are in the archaeological record. After a hole had been drilled into the slab, the cutting tool was retracted from the hole, and then the stone core was snapped off, most likely with a chisel, and then it was removed. Many of these tube drill cores have been found, and some of them have been quite well preserved down to this day.
Come on, man.
Even though they're ancient, the drill cores themselves still show clear machining marks, and these marks come in the forms of lines or grooves that are etched into the stone itself. These grooves in particular will prove to be a very key part of this investigation. Another interesting signature of this tube drill process is the fact that the holes and the cores themselves are actually not straight. The top of the cores taper slightly inwards the deeper that the hole is cut. Now, some of you might be looking at these examples and thinking to yourself, well, there's no mystery here, Ben. This has all been solved. There was a TV show. It was a PBS special. It had Egyptologist Mark Lehner, and they showed how all this was done in that special. They used copper saws, they used copper tubes, they poured sand and water into the hole, and then they just proved how these holes were made. Well, in return to that, I would say that yes, I do know all about this documentary. And although the experiment itself was really commendable, we should always be trying to learn more about these topics through experiments like these. Their conclusions really don't have anything to do with the evidence that's available to go and look at that's in the archaeological record. Over the course of this video, I'll show how the methods shown in this PBS special have been debunked multiple times in relation to the markings that we see today on drill cores and drill holes, and that the conclusions that were reached in this special and the paper trail that exists behind them are demonstrably wrong. And we'll come back to this special a little bit later on, but on one level I can certainly see how it's very easy to just conclude that the dynastic Egyptians made these marks, as these marks are on their sites and they're found amongst work that was conclusively produced by the dynastic civilization. This conclusion is the only acceptable conclusion for the mainstream, however, when you think about it. It just seems to be the corner that they've painted themselves into in our orthodox version of history. So any new or contrary evidence is just simply dismissed with the claim that the Egyptians must have done everything we see, as there were just no other civilizations in that area before them. This claim is rigidly adhered to, no matter the evidence for a high degree of precision in some of these objects, or the fact that there seems to be an entire class of out-of-place precision objects that are hidden in amongst the rougher work of the dynastic Egyptians. The possibility that some of these sites, or these objects, might have been inherited by the dynastic Egyptians and then worked on, perhaps even written on with their primitive tools, this possibility is just flatly rejected. The only acceptable premise when it comes to the mainstream opinion is that the dynastic Egyptians must have done all of it. Evidence for multiple levels of technology is just notwithstanding, and they must have done all of it with their primitive capabilities and their rough hand tools because there is just no other option. It's becoming increasingly hard to cling to this premise, however, as much new evidence is showing that our past is likely a lot more complicated and that these ancient sites are far more nuanced than we had ever previously thought. These machining marks and the other ancient mysteries like them, they also begin to make a lot more sense when you view them from the perspective of longer timelines, of lost ancient high technology civilizations, and from the perspective of inheritance, of renovation, and of reuse. My favourite example of something that makes absolutely no sense at all in our current version of history, yet it seems both simply and elegantly explained from this new perspective, is the Old Kingdom itself. Our current version of history states that this period was the very first. It emerged directly from the so-called pre-dynastic Stone Age. Why then do the sites that were supposedly built during the Old Kingdom represent the absolute height of capability of ancient Egypt? The Old Kingdom sites and the architecture represents the best stuff, the most precise work, the most massive work that's ever been done not only of ancient Egypt, but pretty much of anywhere. And then the dynastic Egyptians just seem to decline in capability for the next several thousand years. This just isn't how civilizations work. The granite architecture and other artifacts from the Old Kingdom all seem to be made from improbably large and very precisely carved granite, or from some of the other harder substances on Earth like diorite or basalt or andesite. Quarrying this stuff out of the earth is difficult work. Egyptologists disagree on whether or not the Old Kingdom was even capable of quarrying the huge blocks of granite that have been used in structures like the Valley Temple or in the King's Chamber, not to mention the enormous single-piece columns and obelisks that date from that period. Other than what could have only been a tiny amount of meteoric iron, the ancient Egyptians were not known to have access to iron or steel tools until the Middle Kingdom. Now, logically, this is a very tough position to occupy, as the mainstream does, because tremendous granite works like these are very hard to explain when all you have to work with are flint axes, pounding stones, and copper or bronze chisels that are far softer than the material that they're expected to carve.
This is nonsense, of course. Quite clearly, whoever built these Old Kingdom structures, they had the ability to quarry granite and to work with the stone in an almost effortless fashion. There are lots of these sorts of contradictions that are contained in our Orthodox story of history, however. And a lot of these contradictions, mysteries like these Old Kingdom structures, they start to make a lot more sense when you consider it from the perspective of inheritance, that maybe the dynastic Egyptians inherited some of their really cool stuff, and over the next several thousand years of their civilizations, they adopted it, they worked on it, they integrated all that into their culture.
I want to be clear, I'm not rejecting our understanding of dynastic Egypt, nor am I just ragging on the good work of the vast majority of Egyptology. We know much of the dynastic Egyptians and their culture thanks to this profession. Archaeology has taught us a great deal about many of the civilizations that preceded our own, these civilizations that have risen and fallen in the past 6,000 years on Earth. This period, the last 6,000 years, the period that we are still in today, this spans the entire currently known history of human civilization. This period embodies the orthodox concept of a more or less linear progression of technology that goes from the Stone Age to the Space Age. Yet this period, this 6,000 years, it also represents just a tiny slice of the time that modern humans have actually been roaming around on the planet. And it's a slice that's getting relatively smaller and smaller as new discoveries seem to continually make our species older and older, and extends our timelines and our origin further back into the past. Additionally, in recent decades, the scientific community has uncovered considerable evidence for a massive cataclysm, for a planet-changing and catastrophic extinction-level event that happened in our recent past. And I'm talking about the Younger Dryas cosmic impact of only some 12,800 years ago. These new discoveries and this new science point to a possibility of an entirely different premise for looking at ancient Egypt. This new work, it points to the possibility of extended timelines of civilization, of the rise of unknown technologies and of cultures that were subsequently almost utterly destroyed in cataclysm. Strangely enough, this story of extended timelines, of highly capable ancestors who went through a cataclysm, this also happens to be the story that ancient Egyptians tell about their own history, as do almost all ancient cultures in one flavour or another.
If you're looking for more context on these statements, if you take a look at my channel, you'll see that I've made several videos that go into a lot more depth about the Younger Dryas and the events that happened at the end of the last ice age. The first time I wrote and recorded this video, it did include a 15-minute investigation into how some of the first-hand accounts of these tales have been passed down through religion and things like that, right down through to our modern times. And
I'm probably going to play until 3 o'clock and then I'm going to go out.
It's a bit of a distraction.
Enjoy the
away
sun,
from
enjoy the
topic
day
of
a little bit.
tutorials, so I will release that as a video in the future.
That's a good plan.
Now that science is backing
Or
up
till like
the truth
2:30 or
that's
something.
Hastings
So like maybe 2 more
with
hours,
the
maybe.
extension of the human timeline and the
Hopefully
evidence
less.
for the
Hopefully we
Younger
get this
Dryas
time
cataclysm.
before then.
Isn't it high time that we took a long and hard look at exactly what we believe is the true history of human civilizations on this planet? So what does all this have to do with tubular drill holes? I wanted to provide some context for the following discussion about them, and to show that it's not just isolated claims of advanced technology that are being made here. There happens to be quite a lot of circumstantial evidence that supports the premise that they and the other ancient precision anomalies like them, like the boxes in the Serapeum, like the vases in the museum, all of these things have been inherited and are much older than we believe. The evidence for tube drills in ancient Egypt was only first seriously discussed in literature by
Weird lag in this run. What? Why?
He investigated them as well as many other examples of ancient machining in his 1883 publication, The Pyramids and Temples of Giza. Petrie spent years living at Giza, using the best tools of the time to exactly measure, triangulate, and to record many aspects of construction in ancient Egypt. And his work is still often quoted in publications today. Petrie was a very precise and mechanically minded man. To me, he seemed much more of an engineer or a surveyor at heart than an archaeologist, although he was and still is considered to be one of the greatest Egyptologists to have lived. Petrie was a prolific writer.
Damn it, I did it wrong. I did it wrong. I'm gonna pass away.
He was one of the very first to bring these aspects of modern engineering to bear on the ancient remains in Egypt. This passage, which is from Petrie's address to the Anthropological Society of Great Britain and Ireland in 1883, and it was later recorded in their journal for 1884, this best captures his approach and how
Man, that's a frame perfect drone shot, eh? Holy fuck.
Quoting from On the Mechanical Method.
Wow, that was so fast. That was really, really fast.
Quote, though so much labour has been bestowed on the literary remains of the Egyptians, and there are now so many scholars who can read an inscription with ease, yet not a single student appears to have given his attention to the mechanical evidences of ancient knowledge and skill. Beyond cursory remarks on the wall paintings that show technical subjects, such remarks as any intelligent traveller might make, nothing has been written on the methods by which such marvellous results of skill and labour were produced. The latest writer, Bruges, in his History of Egypt, says of the great diorite statue of Khafra, quote, unacquainted with the hardness of steel and the marvellous action of those instruments which in our day scarcely allow the artist to feel the trouble of rough work. That primitive race knew how to conquer the resistance of the hard stone, and to animate a lifeless mass with the spirit and expression of life. No master of modern times is capable of giving an answer to the question, how they managed to overcome the difficulties of the unyielding substance, end quote. Such then is our present lack of knowledge on the subject, and it was a question of special interest to me while living at Giza, surrounded by the finest examples of architecture and masonry, to obtain such information and collect such specimens as might help to answer this most interesting inquiry, end quote. Petrie's making the point here that although a lot of people study the writing and what the dynastic Egyptians told us about themselves, very few people, and even this is the case today, very few people really study the mechanical evidence for how
Gotta
the
look up
dynastic
more there.
Egyptians allegedly built some of these incredible structures and objects that we see. He lived at Giza for several years, as well as some other sites around Egypt, and he really spent a lot of time investigating this specific mystery. One of the things that I'll mention is that Petrie talks about quartz in some of his writings, and what he's referring to is the quartz that's encased in the granite. Granite's a conglomerate material, it's not a uniform material. It has quartz and mica and hornblende and other materials that range from softer to harder. Quartz is the hardest materials. That's what he's referring to when he talks about quartz. Petrie is going to tell us a little bit more about his investigation here, and this is the opening passage from the chapter on the mechanical methods of the dynastic Egyptians in his book, The Pyramids and Temples of Giza. Quote, the methods employed by the Egyptians in cutting the hard stones, which they so frequently worked, have long remained in doubt. Various suggestions have been made, some very impracticable, but no actual proofs of the tools employed or the manner of using them has been obtained. From the examples of work which I was able to collect at Giza, and from various fixed objects of which I took casts, the questions so often asked seem now to be solved. The typical method of working hard stones, such as granite, diorite, basalt, etc., was by means of bronze tools. These were set with cutting points, far harder than the quartz which was operated on. The material of these cutting points is yet undetermined, but only 5 substances are possible: beryl, topaz, chrysoberyl, corundum or sapphire, and diamond. The character of the work would certainly seem to point to diamond as being the cutting jewel, and only the considerations of its rarity in general and its absence from Egypt interfere with this conclusion, and render the tough, uncrystallized corundum the more likely material. Many nations,
What?
both
Come on.
savage and civilized, are in the habit of cutting hard materials by means of a soft substance,
Come
such
on.
as copper, wood, horn, etc., with a hard powder supplied to
Sorry, I
it,
won't do that
and
again.
this being scraped over the stone to be cut, so wears it away. It is therefore very readily assumed by many persons, as I myself did at first, that this method must necessarily have been also used by the Egyptians, and that it would suffice to produce all the examples now collected. Such, however, is far from being the case. End quote. Petrie goes on to discuss the method of stone cutting that he thinks best fits the examples and the evidence that he has. He also outlines and describes for us several pieces of evidence, and these are really key and quite important to this investigation for a couple of reasons. One is that they all come to us from the Old Kingdom. They're some of the oldest objects or from the oldest sites of Old Kingdom in Egypt, so 2400 BC or older. And also that some of these objects are actually still around and available for examination today.
Why? Why?
Quote, "The principal result of the examination of these remains is the discovery that the stone cutting was performed by means of graving points far harder than the material to be cut, and that the stones operated on were quartz or mixtures containing quartz. The graving points must have been therefore of some jewel harder than quartz, since no metal, not even the hardest tempered steel or osmiridium, is capable of cutting quartz, apart from a mere bruising action. This essential principle, that the cutting action was not by grinding with a powder, as in a lapidary's wheel, but by graving with a fixed point, as in a planing machine, must be clearly settled before any sound ideas of the methods or materials can be arrived at. First, we have a circular piece of granite, grooved round and round by a graving point. The grooves here are continuous, forming a spiral, and in one part a single groove may be traced around the piece for a length of 5 rotations equal to 3 feet. Another piece is part of a drill hole in diameter. This has been part of a hole 4.5 inches diameter or 14 inches circumference, as 17 equidistant grooves appear to be due to successive rotations of the same cutting point. We have here a single cut 20 feet in length. Another piece of diorite shows a series of grooves, each ploughed out to a depth of over 1/100th of an inch at a single cut, without any irregularity or starting of the tool." End quote. Petrie introduces us here to a central piece in this debate, his famous drill core number 7, shown illustrated here in a plate from his book. This piece is of specific importance because it's still around and available for viewing in the Petrie Museum in London. And in fact, this piece has been closely examined by several researchers in these modern times, including engineer Christopher Dunn. Here's what Petrie wrote about this drill core in his book, in chapter 19, The Mechanical Methods of the Pyramid Builders. Quote, "On the granite core broken from a drill hole, other features appear, which also can only be explained by the use of fixed drill points. Firstly, the grooves which run around it form a regular spiral, with no more interruption or waviness than is necessarily produced by the variations in the component crystals. This spiral is truly symmetrical with the axis of the core. In one part, a groove can be traced with scarcely an interruption, for a length of 4 turns. Secondly, the grooves are as deep in the quartz as in the adjacent feldspar, and even rather deeper. If these were in any way produced by loose powder, they would be shallower in the harder substance, quartz, whereas a fixed dual point would be compelled to plough to the same depth in all the components." End quote. Petrie also talks about this core number 7 in his address to the Anthropological Society. Quote, "Another evidence of this is seen on the granite core. There the cutting point, which can be traced, has passed through quartz, feldspar, hornblende and mica without the least interruption. And when we consider the strain thrown on a cutting point and suddenly passing from a soft material to a patch of far harder nature, it is evident that not only must the separate cutting points have been each fixed in rigid setting, but that the setting must have been made with great skill and care to prevent the stones from being wrenched out of it or crushed by it by the sudden strain." End quote. There are 2 things to really consider here. Firstly, Petrie goes to great lengths, and not just in his books, but at several points during his life, to debunk the idea that these holes were drilled with an abrasive powder or with sand, as this method does not match his observations of a spiral groove. Secondly, he knows that what he is suggesting when he talks about fixed points cutting easily through very hard stone is something fantastic and beyond our known capabilities at the time. You can see him reaching for explanations with his talk of bronze tubes and cutting jewels of an unknown type. But you have to remember that while he was definitely faithful to his observations, Petrie was still trying to explain the tube drills from the perspective of the relatively primitive dynastic Egyptians and their known capabilities. The possibility of a more advanced or even high technology civilization that existed before these times was not something really ever considered back then. It's only become a possibility now thanks to much new evidence that's come up in our modern times.
There are two methods of stone cutting that are being debated here. One method is the abrasive
in the
powder
head.
method
Oh,
that
come
you put
on.
some sand or other abrasive powder in, and you can use a softer substance like copper or wood or something like that to grind that into the granite and wear it away. And the other method is what Petrie's talking about, which is this spiral cut, almost ripping into the granite of the tubular drill, the things that are indicated by the marks and the striations and the spiral groove that's on things like core number 7. He debated this aspect of ancient stone cutting, of the evidence for fixed point cutting versus abrasive powder cutting with his peers for decades after he made these claims. And some of these debates have come to light thanks to some of Petrie's personal letters.
In 1983, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania had reviewed one of these historical letter exchanges. They got involved in this and tried to shed some light on the subject. They experimented by drilling granite with several different combinations of sand, water, other lubricants and other forms of abrasive grit. And then they took scanning electron microscope pictures of the cores. They somehow very adroitly avoided mentioning what is the actual contentious point in all of this, which is whether the grooves are a single uninterrupted spiral or if they're just a set of many concentric and overlapping grooves. The word spiral doesn't appear at all in this report. They simply state that all of the marks on drill cores are concentric. And although they dodged this aspect of ancient tube drills and their results were somewhat indeterminate, the study itself was really commendable, and it provides an interesting comparison of the various markings between drill cores. Something else that isn't actually mentioned in this report but is significant because of its absence is the lack of testing Petrie's fixed point tube drilling hypothesis. And I think this is because we can't actually do that with tube drills. We certainly can't replicate these spiral grooves that Petrie talks about, so if we can't do it, therefore it's not even possible, therefore don't even acknowledge it. At least that's how I think the logic goes, and as I'll show in the rest of this video, this is actually a pretty common approach when it comes to the mainstream trying to deal with Petrie's observations, or perhaps better stated, to not deal with Petrie's observations. When drilled with dry sand or wet sand, or even with crushed quartz, the drills left no appreciable mark at all on the granite cores, just a rough surface as shown here. When these cores were drilled with emery, corundum, or a diamond slurry, and again they tried multiple lubricants, I know they tried water, olive oil, motor oil, and the process has quite clearly left many concentric rings on the granite core. Just compare these fine concentric rings, they're almost scratches that are left from the abrasive powder. Compare that to the deep and the clearly continuous grooves shown in Petrie's core number 7. It's just not the same thing. Engineer Chris Dunn also replicated this experiment in his book Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. And here you can see his results, with both the core and the drill hole he made using a copper tube and silicon carbide 80 mesh abrasive. Again, compare these results to the Old Kingdom holes and these Old Kingdom cores. How could we say that these came from the same process? They look completely different. Here now we really must turn to an examination of the claim that Petrie made about a spiral groove that goes around core number 7. This really is the elephant in the room when it comes to evidence for ancient high technology, and this is because of what the spiral groove implies. It's also the one aspect of ancient tube drilling that I suspect the mainstream will never ever admit to. And in fact, I'll show how they've gone to some great and even, dare I say, somewhat deceptive lengths in order to dodge this topic in modern times. Petrie repeatedly states in his work that on drill core number 7 and on several other drill holes and drill cores that he examined, the grooves are not only made by fixed points, but they are formed in a continuous spiral. Here, Petrie explains the implications of this observation from his 1884 article in the Anthropological Society Journal. Quote, "A point that should be noticed in the use both of saws and of tubular drills is the immense pressure that must have been applied to make the cutting points bite so deeply into the stone and cut the stuff away so rapidly. The grooves 1/100th of an inch deep in quartz must need a pressure on the point of much over 100 weight, and there were probably at least 10 points occupied in making the whole breadth of the cut of the saw.
This would show that the minimum pressure of at least half a ton must have been applied, and it would seem more likely that 2 or 3 tons would be the working load on one of the 4-inch drills cutting into granite. What also shows this enormous pressure is the rapidity in which the tool sunk into the stone. If we only imagine sawing a block of wood 7 inches thick, cut with a saw making 1-foot strokes, it would be thought quick work to cut down 1 inch in 7 strokes in any but the softest wood. Yet this is the Egyptian rate of cutting or tearing through the hardest blocks of stone known, diorite and granite. The wonder is how any bronze tube or saw blade could bear the requisite pressure without doubling up, and how the jewels could be set in any sockets to support them against such a violent drag.
Come on, man.
This feed rate, or this cutting rate into extremely hard granite that Petrie's talking about, cutting into it like a soft piece of wood with a saw, that's really an astonishing claim. Even our modern equipment of today cannot achieve a feed rate anything close to this. And it's these incredible aspects of Petrie's observation that lures Christopher Dunn into the fray surrounding Petrie's core number 7. Christopher Dunn is a manufacturing engineer with a deep understanding of precision, and he has 50 years of experience in the aerospace and laser application fields. His entry into this particular discussion was an article written in the magazine Analog that was initially published in 1984. In this article, Dunn references Petrie's observations and uses his engineering knowledge to note that the implied feed rate is well beyond any modern drilling capabilities. And he speculates as to a probable process that could create such marks. This article grew in popularity over the following decade, and it stirred up quite a bit of controversy. Quoting from Dunn's book, Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, from the chapter Walking in the Shadow of William F. Petrie, quote, "The most startling feature of the granite core Petrie describes is the spiral groove around the core indicating a feed rate of 0.1 inch per revolution of the drill. In my article, I stated that this feed rate was 500 times faster than modern diamond drills, which penetrate at only 0.0002 inches per revolution. The correct way to describe the feed rate would be to say that it was 500 times greater than modern diamond drills, but the rotation of the drill would not have been as fast as the modern drill's 900 revolutions per minute. When I read Petrie's description of this drill core, I tried to imagine what kind of process could replicate it. It seemed very clear that the spiral groove that wound down the core like a drunken screw, Petrie's description, could not have been made by any loose grains rubbing on the granite. Petrie notes that the groove cut deeper through the quartz than the feldspar, which in conventional drilling would actually be the reverse because quartz is the harder material. The action of a tool that reflected a feed rate of 0.1 inch per revolution of the drill was not the work of conventional drilling as we know it, and demanded consideration of other processes in its creation. All of these features were considered without the physical examination of the artifact in question, and were considered phenomenal not just by me alone, but also by colleagues with whom I discussed their relevance. It seemed from the evidence described by Petrie that a sure way to create the spiral groove was to use a process whereby the tool oscillated, like a jackhammer or hammer drill, while it turned. I selected the method to be ultrasonic because with quartz having resonant properties, it would respond to the vibration, and this might explain the deeper cut through the quartz than the feldspar." End quote. Now we begin to see why Petrie's observations of a spiral groove and Chris Dunn's article that speculates as to possible causes, we see why this is such a tough pill to swallow for the mainstream. If you take what Petrie said at its value, then it's very hard to explain these observations by using the primitive methods that we know the dynastic Egyptians employed. In fact, we'd have trouble recreating such marks today, and that's what Chris Dunn is talking about. Now you have to remember at this point in our story, we're only in the late 80s, and there's a lot that happens in the next couple of decades that brings us to a conclusion. Before we continue with our story of drill core number 7 and take a look at how the mainstream responded to these claims, let's explore the nature and the stakes of this disagreement a little further. In the late 1800s and early 20th century, it wasn't Petrie's direct observations or his measurements that were debated. It was what those observations and measurements implied that drew out objections and protests. Fixed points cutting deep grooves into granite or diorite implies an extreme skill in tool manufacture, and the spiral groove implies an improbable amount of pressure on the tool tip. These are the reasons that there is so much resistance from the mainstream towards Petrie's or Dunn's observations about the nature of tube drilling in ancient Egypt. It's because acknowledging this would quite likely begin a true domino effect for the House of History.
The mainstream simply can't afford to admit that this evidence for ancient high technology is actually valid. Because if they do, the only possibility this leaves is that if the dynastic Egyptians were not capable of this work, as all the evidence suggests, they only used primitive methods and tools, then they must have inherited these objects. And these high technology achievements must have been manufactured in some period earlier by somebody that was far more advanced than the dynastic Egyptians. This is a scenario which only leads to one place, the rewriting of the story of human civilization, and a serious adjustment to how we think about the earliest ancient civilizations like dynastic Egypt. It would be a huge shift for academia to admit this, so is it really any wonder that there's so much resistance to this idea? Let's take a look at the mainstream resistance to Petrie and to Dunn. It centers around a simple principle: never admit that the grooves are spiral or helical. If you claim the grooves are concentric or horizontal, then there is no incredible feed rate into the granite, and there is no requirement for a tremendous pressure on the tooltip, and you can pretty much just explain everything by tube drilling with abrasive powder or with sand. This was indeed the premise of Egyptologist Mark Lehner's PBS special that aired on TV in the late 90s. And it purported to explain how the ancient Egyptians cut stone. I've linked this segment, or what there is of it that you can find on YouTube, in the description below, so you can watch it for yourself.
Mark challenges one of the team to show him the answer.
All right, we have a big block of granite here. So how's this copper going to cut this granite?
In this PBS Nova special, they go outside in Egypt and they test bronze chisels, bronze saws and tubular drills on granite. And they debate whether it was just sand or sand and water that were used along with the softer metal in order to cut the stone. So they start their experiment, and after a few days of making some poor Egyptian fellows work in the sun, grinding on the rock, they show off their incredible progress of barely more than an inch into the stone.
As you can see here, we achieved this in just a few days.
They pop out their drill core and declare victory.
Wow! Popped right out of there. Oh, look at that. Yes. That could be fourth dynasty, Dennis.
Petrie's work and his observations aren't actually mentioned in this at all, and as with the Penn University study, neither is the word spiral or helical. Now, I don't want to nitpick this to death. It was quite clearly done for a television audience. It wasn't a real attempt at a scientific study or anything like that, but there are a couple of things about this that I just have to mention. For example, this is how they claim to start the cut for the horizontal bronze saw.
So you're going to chip a groove, and then you're going to put the copper and slide it back and forth.
We're going to put sand inside the groove, and we're going to put this saw on top of the sand, and then let the sand do the cutting.
How then did they start this hole for the tube drill? It just isn't addressed. Also, note the blatant use of steel chisels here in order to break off the drill core. They had bronze chisels as they were shown earlier in the documentary, so why didn't they use the bronze instead of the steel? Because as it turns out, it's not easy to snap off a chunk of granite with a bronze chisel, as the bronze just bends against the granite. When Chris Dunn experimented by drilling into granite with a tube drill, he also found out that he could not break the core out with a copper or a bronze chisel for this exact reason. And he notes that he had to resort to using steel chisels in order to snap it off. And you can see the exact same thing happening here. This is a serious flaw in the primitive model that the mainstream seems to want to stick to. They also never compared their work to the real Old Kingdom drill cores or drill holes. We just get a quick look at the drill hole, Mark Lehner declares victory, and that's it.
That could be fourth dynasty, Dennis.
Now, I do want to say again that this experiment itself was quite commendable. We should always be trying to find out more about these topics by doing experiments like these. But the conclusions that were reached here really have nothing to do with the evidence that's in the archaeological record. We never see a comparison of this core to Petrie's core. We don't really even get a close-up look at any of it. And I've got to imagine that Mark Lehner knew about Petrie's observations, he knew about Petrie's claims going into this, and he doesn't mention Petrie, it just never gets addressed at all. So at some level, to me, this whole documentary is something of a red herring that's put up there in order to just avoid even talking about the things that Petrie was saying and his claims of a spiral groove. And this really is the meat of the argument that I've kind of exhaustively tried to expose here. It all comes down to helical versus horizontal grooves.
Come on,
So you'd
man.
think
Like,
that
it's just so
surely
fucking
that this
dumb.
has been discussed somewhere in the literature, if not on the television documentaries.
So it turns out that this has been addressed, and here is where we get into the real proof of just how
I'm gonna use the washroom. I'm gonna take a break. Not like a long
Dennis
break,
Stocks
and then
is
just
the
play for like
gentleman
another
working
hour,
with
and then
Mark
I'm gonna
Lehner,
go
he's pictured in the
outside
middle
and
here,
enjoy the day. I
and his
think.
research and experiments, like the one shown
Stream
in
for
this
another hour and a
documentary,
half, I think.
they're firmly lodged in mainstream literature. And Stocks was also one of Chris Dunn's most vocal critics. Now, quoting once more from Chris Dunn's book, here he talks about the reaction to his article where he proposes an ultrasonic method of cutting stone. Quote, "This idea, of course, while popular in some circles, was certainly not popular among Egyptologists, one of whom is Dennis Stocks, who writes, quote, despite this apparent abundance of evidence, many people still argue that these simple tools were not capable of producing the artifacts that survive, and, therefore, that there had to be some as yet undiscovered technology that the Egyptians possessed. These supposed technologies include diamond-tipped saws and drills and even the use of sonic waves to cut stone." End quote. Stocks goes on to claim in his article that he had been able to replicate and demonstrate the efficiencies of the tools we know were in the ancient Egyptians' toolbox. His work is exhaustive and goes to great length in describing every step of his methods, and it includes photographs of bow drills, copper chisels, stone axes, and copper tubes for drilling into diorite using sand. With such a comprehensive and complete study of how simple, primitive tools were applied in prehistory, and with the support of academia behind him, it would seem that the subject of ancient technology was an open and shut case. The experiments by Stocks are lodged firmly in the academic record and are referenced by Dieter Arnold in Building in Egypt. This should be enough, we might think, to accept these findings and look no further for answers. Yet, there is the nagging question spiralling around core number 7 in the Petrie Museum. Stocks described the results of a drilling experiment that was conducted in 1999 as part of his involvement with the Lena Hopkins Nova obelisk experiment, regarding a core that he ground out of granite using quartz sand and a copper tube attached to a shaft and manually driven by a bow and sand. He writes, quote, "Horizontal striations similar to the ancient ones on rose granite were visible both in the wall of the hole and upon the core." End quote. Stocks' seemingly innocuous statement actually speaks to the heart of the debate regarding the technology used by the ancient Egyptians to drill granite. Horizontal striations, as opposed to helical grooves, would sink the sonic machining theory in a sea of vibrating quartz quicksand, where it will forever rest and, perhaps, be remembered by some as an interesting yet troublesome theory and by others as the product of an overactive imagination. Is it possible that Petrie was mistaken or confused when he described this core? Petrie's observations of a helical groove were explained by Stocks to be the result of the random action of quartz sand in the drilling process. This process produces, for the most part, horizontal striations, which he noted in his drilling experiment. End quote. As with most of the mainstream research on this topic, Dennis Stocks' experiments and his articles, which ran in several publications in the late 90s, these things, they don't actually directly challenge Petrie's observations of a spiral groove that he observed on core number 7. They kind of skirt around the issue, and in this case, he just claims that what his experiments match, all of the concentric grooves that we see on Old Kingdom drill cores. They don't directly challenge the observations that Petrie made. But you can see that Chris Dunn is starting to sort of question the things that Petrie's saying, because at this point he hasn't actually examined the evidence for himself. However, there were some researchers that did try to tackle Petrie's claims, and they tried to directly disprove the things that Petrie was saying about core number 7. John Reed, an acoustics engineer, and Harry Brownlee, a stonemason and a sculptor, travelled to London in order to examine Petrie's core number 7 for themselves. They photographed the core in detail, and they concluded that the grooves were horizontal, not helical, as Petrie had claimed. Their conclusion, which conveniently matches the orthodox premise of tube drilling with sand or abrasive powder, was cited in Ian Lawton and Chris Ogilvie Herald's book, Gyges the Truth. Quoting from Gyges the Truth, they, Reed and Brownlee, make the critical distinction, not effectively made by Dunn, between the horizontal striations that are found on all cores and spiral striations, which are genuinely connected spiral grooves. Reed and Brownlee have examined and photographed this core in minute detail, and report that even on this they can detect only horizontal striations. They can only conclude that there may have been some confusion in the labelling of the artefact at the museum. End quote.
No, it's here.
It's kind of a little disingenuous just to suggest that this whole thing boils down to some sort of mislabeling affair at the museum when you have all of Petrie's words and his conclusions that it was spiral. It's not just labelled incorrectly. Petrie stated many times that it was spiral. And it's also worth noting at this point that Petrie provided actual proof. He provided detailed measurements for his observations of a spiral groove, and he did this more than once because he faced considerable kickback for these claims himself, and these measurements can still be found in his publications. So, in that case, what's the actual evidence that's cited by Reed and Brownlee for their conclusion that these grooves are horizontal? Well, they don't really have any evidence. Their evidence is that they took photographs, and that's it. They didn't take measurements, they didn't do any real analysis, they just took photographs. So they're citing photographs as evidence. Well, Chris Dunn decided to take a little closer look at said photographs. Quoting from Chris Dunn's book once again, quote, "It is noteworthy that Reed and Brownlee are confident in describing horizontal striations. On a truncated cone such as core number 7, it requires more than visual inspection to determine if a groove with a slight pitch or distance between the start and end point in a 360-degree turn is helical or horizontal. Petrie provided dimensions in his analysis, while neither Stocks, nor Reed, nor Brownlee, nor Lawton, nor Ogilvy Herald have provided any measurements to support their assertion that Petrie's observations were incorrect, only that they, quote, had examined the core in minute detail, end quote. It is easy to be mistaken when we examine Petrie's core number 7 to try and determine if the grooves are spiral or horizontal. It is especially easy to make a mistake if we examine a photograph in which the core is tilted to one side, such as in the photograph pictured in Gyges the Truth. Before travelling to England to examine the core firsthand, I suspected that their conclusions were in error after I examined their photograph in my graphics program. Plate 25A shows core number 7 as seen in Gyges the Truth. Plate 25B shows core number 7 in a corrected orientation with a vertical central axis. A construction reference frame is provided so that the tilt can be seen, and a horizontal dashed line was added to compare it with the grooves on the granite core. The horizontal dashed line indicates that the grooves appear to be horizontal in plate 25A and tilted in plate 25B. End quote. So they tilted the photographs. They rotated the photograph on the page so that when you're looking at it in the book, it looks like the lines on the core are straight, but they've actually rotated the core such that the lines actually look straight. Now, I have to give them some benefit of the doubt. This was either a very unfortunate mistake that was made, or if it was deliberate, you can only describe this as being somewhat deceptive. It's kind of a really cheap trick to try and pull on the audience to then make a claim that, you know, the grooves are horizontal. And I'm really thankful that Chris Dunn caught this and exposed it in his book. And at this point in the story, Chris Dunn decides, well, it's time to go to England. It's time to go and examine this troublesome drill core number 7 for myself. And in fact, he makes 2 trips to England to do this. He goes in 99 and then again in 2003. And to cut a long story a little bit shorter, he completely vindicates Petrie's claim of a spiral groove. As an engineer with extensive experience working with precision tools and manufacturing, Dunn is one of the most qualified people you could ever hope to take on this task, at least in my opinion, and I'm very grateful that he did. He updated Petrie's measurements with modern precision equipment, and he was able to trace a spiral groove along the length of the core with cotton, as shown here. Other people, notably Malcolm McClure, a retired engineer, were also able to replicate this same experiment. Quoting Dunn, "I performed the same thread wrap around the core with Mr. McClure and Miss Annie's observing closely. After achieving 16 wraps around the core, I could sense that Mr. McClure was anxious to try it himself, and he eagerly took the core and thread from me and set to work wrapping the thread around the core, being careful to fit it into the groove as he went. After performing several wraps himself, he declared that he was speechless." End quote. So even after examining the core for himself, even after showing and writing articles on his website showing his findings and doing this cotton wrap thread, Dunn decided that still more proof was required to prove out that the grooves were in fact spiral. He was still facing significant resistance even after he published this article. People were arguing about the same pictures, the same rotated pictures, and saying, look, the lines are straight. So he went to the next step. He had a detailed latex moulding of the drill core made, and then set about to prove that the grooves were spiral using geometry.
By rolling out the mold onto a flat surface and by carefully referencing the two edges to each other, you can geometrically show if an arc of a groove is horizontal or helical. No surprise here, his conclusion, a spiral groove. This sort of technique, rolling out a cone onto a flat surface, this type of thing is used by engineers in industrial design for many different things like gas turbine engines. So this is proof of a nature that is very hard to argue against. And furthermore, all of his work, all of his data and his results are available on his website, and they're in his book, Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. And I would highly recommend that you pick up a copy if you're interested in this topic, or at least visit his website for more of the details. Quoting Chris Dunn one more time. Readers are welcome to perform their own analysis of these photographs, but my final conclusion based on Malcolm McClure's and my on-site inspection, as well as the flat layout of the surface with arcs applied, is that the grooves around the Petrie Core 7 is a spiral rather than individual horizontal striations, as claimed by Reed and Brownlee and others. Moreover, this spiral groove travels the full length of the core, and any discontinuities are due to the ripping out of the mica, a constituent of the granite, with some discontinuities seen as faint lines on the latex peel, but on the granite core they cannot be seen with the naked eye. Taking into consideration Petrie's own account, my inspection in 1999, and Malcolm McClure and my inspection in 2003, along with analysis of the latex impression of the core, the question as to whether the groove is horizontal or spiral appears to be answered. End quote. What this ultimately leaves us with is a real mystery, but it's conclusively a mystery, and it's conclusively something that cannot be explained from within our current paradigm of history. This is my opinion, and that's really all it is, so take it for what it's worth. But I think the idea of an advanced ancient civilization being responsible for this tube drilling is both an entirely possible scenario, and it's one that makes sense out of many of the historical mysteries and contradictions like these tube drills. I think that when we see evidence for advanced machining, or the precision objects like the boxes or the stone vases, or some of the greatest examples of megalithic stone architecture, what we're looking at is the remnants and the remains of an unknown and a technologically advanced ancient civilization. One that most likely existed well before the Younger Dryas, and one whose past stretches deep into what we know as the last ice age. I think that this civilization existed on the planet alongside with the more primitive hunter-gatherer subsets of humanity that we know existed in these times. And I think that this civilization was wiped out almost entirely during the cataclysmic end to the Ice Age that happened some 13,000 years ago. And this was the same event that wiped out fully half of the megafauna on the planet. Tales of this event and some of this civilization's cosmic knowledge, like the motions of the heavens, were encased in oral stories and traditions, and these eventually became religions. And these tales of epic destruction, the remaking of the world, and some of their cosmic knowledge have persisted down into even today's religions. When humanity eventually rose again and restarted civilization as we know it, they got a big kickstart from some of these remnants and some of this knowledge from their ancient precursors. And I think this was particularly prevalent in the Old Kingdom of Egypt. As I've said many times across my videos, the ancient Egyptians themselves describe their own civilization as a legacy of their ancestors. So let's summarize this tale. Over the past 150 years, there has essentially been two schools of thought when it comes to Old Kingdom tube drill use. On one side, we have Petrie and Dunn with comprehensive engineering and metrology-focused, detailed examinations of the evidence. Their investigations conclusively show there is a deep spiral groove on the pieces in question. They follow that evidence, and it leads us to some startling and some challenging conclusions about how these holes and these cores were cut. On the other side of this, we have what I'll collectively call the mainstream position, and although I do know that there is plenty of nuance here, they do all uniformly disagree with Petrie and Dunn because there just can't have been an advanced civilization before the Egyptians. And they say this in lots of different ways without ever actually addressing the evidence for said advanced civilization. Primitive methods simply must have been used because, well, there just isn't any other option, so therefore spiral grooves are simply not possible because of what they mean. We can only have horizontal striations on our drill core. And for evidence, they mostly dodge this argument entirely. They never ever seem to mention the word spiral, And they have lots and lots of experiments that show tube drills cutting into stone with abrasive powder and leaving these resultant horizontal striations. And we even have some mainstream television shows doing this and then just declaring victory.
That could be fourth dynasty, Dennis.
And I have to say, these guys are not going to find any arguments from me on this. This method of using sand and copper tubes, quite clearly it does work for cutting granites. You can do tube drilling this way, but it just doesn't bear any resemblance at all to the evidence that's in the archaeological record. These marks don't match at all what Petrie has observed on core number 7 or on several other of the drill holes and cores that he talks about. And then, 100 years or so after Petrie makes his just astonishing observations about these drill cores, somebody finally decides to directly challenge Petrie's observation and tries to prove that he was incorrect. And what do we get? Well, we know what we get. We get something that was either an unfortunate mistake or it was just a cheap and slightly deceptive attempt to fool the public. Rotated photographs of a spiral cut drill core that tries to fool you into believing that the grooves are horizontal. Put yourself in the position of judge here. If you were honest and if you were open-minded about history and if you were trying to make a judgment on this topic for yourself based on the evidence and based on the considered opinions of scholars and researchers that have weighed in on this over a 150-year period, which of these two sides would you choose? I think it's a real shame that there is such strong resistance to what is some very good work that's been done by both Petrie and Chris Dunn here. I think we could stand to learn an awful lot if we opened our mind to the possibility that this is actually what it seems to be, that it's evidence of some unknown form of ancient high technology. Who knows what we could learn if we just applied ourselves to uncovering these secrets and we applied ourselves with scientific purpose and real vigor. And that's all I'm really calling for here. It's the same thing that I always try to say in my videos. We should be doing more open-minded and scientifically based research into these topics and into these mysteries, and then following the evidence no matter where it leads. I want the institutions, the organizations that control the funding, those that greenlight the expeditions and the scientific investigations to really consider all of this evidence and to explore the premise that maybe something pretty advanced was going on at some point deep in the past, and that maybe we'd get somewhere if we just investigate these sites and these mysteries with that perspective in mind. Over the last 30 years, we have vastly expanded our horizons when it comes to just how old the human species is. And we now know that the biggest damn cataclysm to hit the planet in the last 5 million years happened barely 13,000 years ago. Yet in that same time frame of 30 years, if not in the last 150 years, our view on the history of human civilizations has barely budged an inch. Now, I understand that entrenched establishment positions need a lot of evidence to force some change, but honestly, it seems to me that we're at this point now. And it's time to at least start considering the possibility of an ancient and unknown advanced civilization being responsible for so many of these mysteries and contradictions that we see represented in megalithic architecture all around the world. There are lots of drill holes left for us to examine in Egypt, and we should be out there making latex impressions of them all just as fast as we can, and trying to preserve these precious examples of ancient technology. As far as I know though, nothing of the sort is going on, and the only person who has even attempted a real scientific investigation into this is Chris Dunn, and he did that on Petrie's core number 7 that's housed in the Petrie Museum in London. Now I think he closed the discussion on this particular core, and the mainstream essentially just seems to want to stay quiet and hope that not that many people get to hear his argument. I personally know of 10, probably more drill holes that would really benefit from a similar examination. And there are certainly more drill cores in the Egyptian Museum and in other locations around the world. If somebody wants to fund it, heck, I'd certainly volunteer to go around making latex molds and taking measurements. But this really is something suited to an archaeological department of a university. I'm just some punter yelling stuff from the cheap seats. So, where does this leave us? I said at the beginning of this documentary that I would prove to you that the ancient Egyptian tube drills are evidence of some form of lost ancient high technology, and that they left a signature that was beyond even our capabilities. And I think I've shown plenty of proof between Petrie and Chris Dunn that the grooves around core number 7 and other examples that Petrie talks about are in fact spiral. And when you consider what that means, it means that the feed rate into granite is roughly 500 times greater than what we can achieve today with our modern diamond tip drills and all of our hydraulics and advanced machinery. I think that qualifies as something that's beyond our capability. What do I think actually explains these tube drills? Well, I can honestly say that I just don't know. I just don't have the frame of reference to really answer that. I really hope that we have the courage to one day actually find out. This was also Chris Dunn's conclusion when it comes to the drill course, and I want to particularly just acknowledge and to thank him for his perseverance in the face of so much opposition and for his
Yo,
just
Bongo
most
June, thanks, bro. How you doing? How was your Aztec agent session, man?
I'd like to close out this
You can lurk if you
presentation
want.
and
Thanks,
leave
bro.
you with one last quote from Chris Dunn.
I'm gonna be playing in a minute.
A little bit as to a possible method that might be able to create Petrie's core number 7. Quote, with respect to what methods the ancient Egyptians used to create core number 7, I have no real answers. However, to replicate the core and holes, an experimentalist might consider softening the granite using heat. Does the burnished finish on the surface of core number 7, as well as the random runs between the grooves and the proliferation of depressions where mica is removed, along with the spiral groove itself, indicate that these characteristics might be replicated if the granite was brought close to its melting point? Such a method may involve using a tool similar to a thermal lance that sacrifices its material in the process. Until an answer is found, Petrie's core number 7 will remain in its case.
That's a dupe, right? 131, you have
as evidence
131,
of
yeah.
one of
Oh
Egypt's
man, that's
mysterious
frustrating.
lost technologies. End quote.
I guess it didn't complete though, which is good.
Well, there it is, the mystery of the Egyptian tube drills. Let me know what you think about them in the comments below. I'm sure that there'll be plenty of comments and questions.
Yeah, dude, I'm trying
sure
to
there'll be
get
some inevitable
natural
concerns.
stuff mainframe too.
I actually have a number of offcuts and a whole few other sections that I've dropped from this video that I'll probably release as short follow-on videos to this one. I'm pretty happy to be done and finished making this video. It's been a couple years in the works, this one, and it's been a big effort over the past few months. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody that supported the channel, in particular the executive producers list. People know who you are and you know why you're on that list. I also definitely want to thank everybody that supports me via Patreon or Subscribestar or who donates via PayPal. You really do make all of this possible.
Yeah.
It's the only way that I can spend the time to make these videos, so thank you very much.
I wonder if completing
And
the
along
objective
those lines,
causes
if you
lag,
do like
though, you
this
know
kind
what I
of
mean?
work and if you get something from what I'm doing, please do consider supporting
Like, I wonder
Uncharted
if
X via the
uploading the
value model.
disc
You can find out all the ways to do that
causes
over at
some sort of lag in the game, just
unchartedx.com/support.
text.
The value for value model, it's a pretty simple model. It goes along the lines of, if you get any value from my work, if you like the kind of thing that I'm doing and you want to see it continue, then
Holy
it would be
shit, are
great
you
if you
serious,
could return
bro?
some of that value back to me. It's the only way I can do it.
Oh.
Maybe share the videos
Nostalgic
with
game
friends,
sounds.
maybe
Thanks,
share
bro.
videos
Thanks for the
on
raid. Are you
the
serious, man?
accomplished so much together. I want to thank all of my family and my friends and my staff. Only say this, we have
I very
worked
much
hard.
appreciate everybody that
We've
does
left
support
it
the channel,
all, as the
and
athletes
I've
would
got a
say,
lot of
we've
stuff
left
that
it
I'm
all in the
working on,
field.
and I will see
We
you
don't have
guys.
to.
Yeah. Peace.
Yo, thanks, bro. I was watching your stream yesterday. You were playing. What were you playing?
A
Oh
month
my
when
god,
we're
what were you
sitting
playing? I was watching
in
it.
Florida,
Fuck.
we're not going to be looking at each other and saying, you know, if we only worked a little bit harder, you can't work harder.
What the fuck are you?
I will always
You were playing
fight
something
for
yesterday.
you.
I was watching it. God damn it.
I will be watching, I will be listening, and I will.
Hey
Why
everyone,
can I not
you
remember
that
it?
and this is
The
the
future
Uncharted X
of
channel.
this
Whatever.
country
Today's
has
video,
never
we're
been
going to
better.
take a look at what is probably the most
Thanks,
precise
bro. Yo,
form
thanks for that raid, man.
ever to come out of ancient Egypt.
What was I watching?
Famed archaeologist Flinders Petrie called this perhaps
can't
the
remember.
finest
Sorry, dude.
piece of mechanical work
Perfect Dark. Oh
ever
wow,
achieved
nice,
in
man.
such a hard
Hell
and
yeah,
practical
dude.
medium.
Thanks. I appreciate that
I'm also
raid a
gonna give you my
lot.
thoughts about why
Worked
I
on
think
nicely.
this
Yeah,
is
yeah. I'm gonna be
awesome.
playing. I'm gonna be playing. I'm just
Objects
loading the
are
vape.
made from some form
What
of
on my
geometry.
grinder?
So I hope you'll stick around and let's get to it. In this video,
Oh,
we're
baby.
taking a look at the area known as Lahun, or it's also sometimes called Illahun or Kahun, and it's
Army
located
men,
to
that's
the
what it
south
was.
of the traditional pyramid belt of
Yeah,
Giza,
man, Army men,
Saqqara,
dude.
Dashur, and then down to Madun. Lahun
That's a pretty
itself
dope
sits
game,
very
man.
close to the opening
How's
of
Perfect
what is
Dark?
called the
Thanks for
Fayum
thanks for the raid, man.
Fayum Oasis, which
Follow
you can see here from the
Nostalgic
satellite
Game
imagery is
Sounds.
this large green leaf-shaped space that is to the
He
west of
truly
the
streams
Nile
all
and the
games. I
east
only
of
stream
the
one
West
game and
coast
one
of
level.
Western Australia.
So far.
I talked a lot more about the Fayum in my video about Hawara and the labyrinth. In fact, the ancient name for
Thanks,
this
dude. Oh,
actually meant
oh, you know
the
what?
mouth or opening of the
I
Nile.
have
There
I
are
have
a
on my
number of
settings,
Egyptian sites
guys,
that
I had a
are
24-hour
area of
follower
the
mode
Fayum.
on. I'm gonna turn it
Hawara
off
is
just
one
because I
of them.
had
It is the theorized
spammers.
location to the Great Labyrinth. There's also a mud brick pyramid there.
And Maidun is nearby.
Oh, really?
Maidun has the broken down pyramid that is allegedly from Sneferu, or perhaps his father Huni from the end of the third.
Yeah, I had
fourth
spammers
There's
yesterday.
also Mastada 17 at Maidun. I've done
They were
videos on
spamming.
those structures. The most notable feature on this site, at least above the ground, is the remnants of this mud brick pyramid. This structure is associated with Pharaoh Senusret II, who was also known as Usertesen, and he was a ruler of the 12th dynasty in the Middle Kingdom, which was around
Yeah, dude, that's a
1819
fucking hard-ass
BCE,
game, dude.
which
Not
makes
my
this
language.
structure at least 4,000 years old, although other areas of this site
Yeah,
have recently
so
been
viewers,
found to be
readers, you can
significantly
chat now.
altered.
Sorry, I had to do it for the
Looking
friggin'
at this pyramid
spammers
today,
yesterday. It was
you can still
ridiculous.
see a few large white
I might keep it
limestone
on again
blocks
in the
its
future, but man,
structure.
it was crazy.
It was once
Gives me
cased in
24
white
hours
limestone
to
like this, but it
see
unfortunately
if the
suffered
channel's
same
real or
fate
not,
as
and
did so many other structures in
it
monumental
allows.
nature, and
I put the
that
channel
has
points to
been
1,000
and the reuse of
points
its
for any
stone
redemption
by the
of sound,
notorious Ramses
of
II
speech to
of the
text.
19th dynasty. He took the limestone off
So,
this pyramid
dude,
for his own building purposes, and
it's
today we're
ridiculous.
just left with the mud brick
When I just use
external
your brains
structure
playing
that
perfect.
is
Oh yeah, really.
Of
Thought you
course,
did,
what
yeah.
is
No,
of
it's too
more
crazy.
interest
It's too
to us
wild.
is
Like
beneath the
it's
ground,
especially the
and
deep
our
sea.
exploration in this video will lead
Even
down
deep
the
beating deep
shaft
sea on
of
Perfect
the tunnel
Agent is
system that
ass.
leads to underneath the
It's just
pyramid.
so ass. Cause
I
I think
had a
I think
chance to
Elvis
visit
has
in
to
late
survive, and
2020
then
as
you
part
have
of
to
the
survive,
Egypt
and
trip
it's
that
just
I
so
hosted
terrible.
along with Jimmy from
You
the
always go in the
excellent
wrong
Bright Insights
place.
channel. I'm sure most of you have seen his work before, but if not, make sure you do go check it out and subscribe. There's a link below.
But they put the
We were joined
some of the
by
best
a
levels
great
at the
group of
start, which
people
is nice.
who were all adventurous enough to make the journey to Egypt.
Like
despite
Villa?
all the
Were you playing
challenges.
Villa Perfect Agent? I love that level.
We
That's
got
like
the
my
chance
favorite.
to go out here and to visit the underground tunnel, the shafts, the passageways that lead to.
I'm gonna be
rooms that are
speed
located
running
directly
Villa
beneath the
Perfect
pyramid.
Agent. I'm gonna
And
try to get a
footage that
completion.
you
My
see
goal is to get
from that trip,
sub 2 minute, or
live
at
footage
least
as well as the footage from a
maybe
couple
sub
of
150, and then I think that's top 100.
in the modern era,
I don't have any
the site
completions
was
yet,
really
but
first explored and documented by Sir
that'd be a
William
cool
Evans
goal to
Petrie.
get.
He spent a couple of years in this site, and in fact, in the
Right.
Fayoum region in
If
general.
my stream
from
drops, also
1888 to
please
around
refresh it in like a
1890,
couple
and
minutes. I
then
don't
a
know why
couple of
it's
decades
been
later,
dropping.
He again came back to this region.
It's a
in
raid, man.
1914 and did more work here. This site has only recently been opened up to the public in 2019 after renovations of this particular segment that we're visiting in the video.
This is pretty cool. This is bedrock? Look, it's all bedrock. This is deep. Oh, we got blocks down here too, huh?
Halfway down the entrance shaft, there is this strange little room with a couple of alcoves, and it's all been cased in.
Alright, I'm gonna
what
play
looks
for
to be
about another
very fine
hour, I
work
think.
in
I only
white
did the first 3
limestone.
stages
I'm
today.
really not sure of the purpose, but this is about halfway
Oh
down
no way!
this southernmost
Insane.
shaft that leads to these tunnels.
Oh, Villa's the
whole
next one,
area
man.
around the Lahoun Pyramid
Villa's the
is fairly
4th
riddled
level.
with shafts, tombs, and underground structures. The sheer proliferation of shafts is one of the reasons that it took Flinders Petrie so long to find the actual entrance to the chambers that are, in fact, beneath the pyramid. Another reason for this is the fact that this entrance lies to the south of the structure, which is very much out of character for most of the pyramids. They
Sup,
typically
yo,
have
thanks, Joe.
entrances on their northern sides.
Thanks, Joe.
I guess this was part of the slab they had to move. This probably whole slab came out and the one in the middle there. Interesting.
So just before he was due to leave the site, Petrie had his workmen explore just another shaft opening that was on the southern side of the pyramid, and it ultimately led him to this discovery. Here you can see Petrie's drawings of the tunnels and chambers from his book Ilahoun, Kahun and Garob, which was published in 1891.
Sounds like a party, man.
Petrie's shaft, when he excavated it, led him into what proved to be a broad tunnel that's quite wide and tall, and that ascends slightly up in the direction of the pyramid.
Look at that.
And at the
Nice.
end of this, he found a couple of chambers.
Nice.
One of those is cased in limestone, and the other one is made entirely from granite. And it houses a spectacular.
Nice, very nice.
That's
I also have Perfect Dark also for new viewers.
Something else about these maps, just note at the other end of the passage, Petrie was guessing that there was another entrance.
This has been the monkey, oh not the monkey on my back, but the goal I've been aiming for. It's not, because it's very, it's pretty crazy, it's a pretty crazy goal.
So you can see that
It is a good name.
question marks he had
Nice.
on his map here
That's dope.
that he had theorized that there was another builder's main shaft further south of where he entered the tunnel system. Now, although he never actually...
rate that name
excavated
10 out of
in this
10.
way, he was in fact correct, and this main shaft is how we enter the site today.
And we're sneaking in to the Lahoon Pyramid, which I have not been in before.
Thanks, Mongo June. Thank you, Nostalgic Game. Thank you, Joe.
This lighting system that they put in 2,000 years ago is really nice. Isn't it? It's held up really well.
This small alcove area that we're approaching is the original shaft entrance that Petrie used, and as you watch the shot, we'll actually pan up and you can see the size of the shaft that Petrie originally got into this tunnel area with, and you can tell it's quite a small shaft. You probably wouldn't have been able to fit this granite box down it.
So it looks like we're not
As we
close, but
proceed
we're
down
actually very
the video
close.
into the tunnel system,
It
it's
can be
worth
any
mentioning
run.
a couple of details about the
We
history.
have 9 big
There
room
have been
pass
some
away
wonderful
tragedies.
discoveries made in this area of ancient Egyptian artifacts. Most notably,
quite
some jewelry
significant.
from the tomb of a princess, which included a golden crown that was fully complete, including the uraeus, which is the snake adornment that you find on the front of other pharaonic crowns. And there was one of these as well on the front of the
This is not
Sphinx.
the big room.
A piece of it still in the museum. Now, personally, while the jewelry is beautiful and interesting, and I'm sure it
Come
came
on,
from
man.
the dynastic Egyptian civilization and burials of their royalty, I think the real treasure that is on this site is in the precision carved granite box, which I promise we'll get to and we'll examine here pretty soon.
I still
But
haven't
the
slept.
other thing
Nice,
that
bro.
I wanted to cover about this is the attribution of this site to the Middle Kingdom. When Petrie first found the chambers that are at the end of the tunnel, in them Petrie found part of a limestone stele that mentioned the pharaoh Senusret II, who back in Petrie's time was known as Usertesen, and this was a primary factor for linking the site to the Middle Kingdom. That said, archaeology on this site is still ongoing, as there are still many unexplored areas and shafts and other tombs around Lahoon Pyramid. And in 2010, there were some additional discoveries made of other tombs and burials near the site that have been dated, legitimately dated back to the very first and second dynasties of
Thanks, bro.
ancient
You've been
Egypt,
following me for
which
some time now. I
really throws
appreciate
the
that. Nostalgic.
relation of this whole site to the Middle Kingdom kind of into question. In the footage, we're now getting down to the business end of the structure.
Oh, that
We're
was
directly
see
beneath
like
the pyramid, 30 feet or so
Good
down
run.
into the bedrock, and these are the chambers that were drawn on Petrie's map. The
so we
first
want
room
that guy
is
to get
cased in
naturally
fine
stuck in
white
that
limestone.
mainframe.
The room with the box is just beyond it.
Sometimes he
It's
does an animation where he
entirely
turns
of
around
granite.
and runs into it.
It has an arched ceiling, also of granite, and there is one other location
That's what
in
we
Egypt
want.
that I know of with a similar arched ceiling. See if you can guess where that is before I give the answer later on in the video. Before we take a closer look at the box, I wanted to point out another strange feature here, and that is the tunnel that wraps around the central chamber, as shown on Petrie's diagram.
Just loops around and connects up.
Oh man,
Just
it could potentially save. I don't know. For me, like 3 to 4 seconds, honestly, potentially. Like this one wouldn't. This would save maybe 2. Like the perfect run. See, like, so the pause out is usually 23. Was that 26? Oh wow, that was 23. Crazy. Yeah, probably 3 to 5 maybe. It's hard to tell though.
hello, little guy. Little bat. He's looking
Something
at
like that
it,
though,
Lee.
yeah. That's what I'm pacing. For me, I'd say it could save. I'm aiming for a 2-second save. That's my goal. Anything more is
There doesn't seem to be any
Bonus.
purpose to this. I have heard that some people try to say it relates to the number 5 and to Osiris somehow, but it just seems to wrap around and then exit next to the box in the central chamber. The only other thing that I can think of is that perhaps it had some function, if this box and chamber really ever had an original functional purpose, but I really have no idea what it could be. This tunnel that wraps around the chamber gives us a second
was-
entrance into the main room, and it's here that we find this just superlative precision
It is.
box, which is of course labelled as a coffin. It is no stretch to say that this is quite likely the single most precisely carved granite object that comes to us from ancient Egypt. When Petrie found it, it was just like this. There was nothing in it, there are no inscriptions
why?
anywhere, and there was no trace of any lid. A couple of features you might notice straight away. It seems to be somewhat tilted to the eye, and in fact it is. The exterior height of the box changes by about 4 inches along its length, yet the inside walls of the cavity are cut very precisely square with the top, which is just utterly flat. The floor in here in this room is level, so ultimately it's like the whole box is somehow leaning over. Now it's possible that the box was moved at some point in the room. You can't take it out of the room because it's too big for the doorways. And it's also possible that there may have been originally something beneath the box that had brought it up to level. Or perhaps the lean was some sort of deliberate measure taken for functionality. I really don't know. Certainly the precision that is evident on the rest of the box meant that this slope was a deliberate step that was taken in its manufacture. But as far as I know, none of the other precision carved boxes anywhere in Egypt have this feature. Just like none of them have the large lip that this one does around the top. It makes this box a very, very unique piece. The precision of this box becomes evident once you begin to measure it. The margin of error when measuring the flatness of the surfaces, or the margin of error between how parallel each surface is to each other, for example each end of the box, is only within a few thousandths of an inch. One way to imagine this is to imagine carving up a single inch into 1,000 equal segments, and that's the scale that you have to measure within in order to define the accuracy of the work that went into creating this artifact. It's simply astounding, and it's certainly not the product of any crude hand tools like flint chisels or diorite pounding stones. Note also that the surfaces of the box have not been polished like other boxes. They're just so finely ground as to be basically perfectly flat. The interior corners are equally exquisite, and you can see here that the radius of these internal corners is about equal to the width of the tip of a ballpoint pen. And this is an order of magnitude finer work than even the incredible boxes of the Serapeum. What's more, these tiny corner radius values are consistent as far as I can tell, and not just on the inside. The same degree of care and precision has been applied to the corners that exist underneath the lip of the box on the outside. When you remember that this is carved from a single piece of granite,
I really fucking hate
and that
this
a
game.
single mistake could mess up the dimensions of the whole artifact, it becomes almost entirely impossible to assume that this work was done by some primitive culture using hand tools. It just isn't possible. And if somebody claims that it is possible, then the only way that you can prove that is to actually replicate this type of work with all of the most difficult measures that go into it, the internal corner radius, the flatness within thousandths of an inch, and you need to do so using the techniques that you claim they used to make it. And as far as I know, no one has ever even come close to this. Something else to keep in mind when you add in the lip around the top of this box.
Yo, thanks, buddy. 141. We're going for sub 141, but thanks, man.
There's one more unique feature about
Thanks, buddy.
this box that I haven't seen in any other boxes.
We're going for one. The true goal is probably 139. That's probably the true goal. We want. Honestly, I think I'll stop playing at 139 for now.
When Flinders Petrie discovered this box and he
but we want faster, but
he was simply astounded by it, and he did his best to measure it and report on just how precisely this box seems to have been constructed.
Thanks, man.
Personally, I think this artifact should be scanned with modern laser-based 3D modeling tools, as well as measured with a modern surface roughness meter that is accurate down to the microns. However, and as usual, this type of work is just not a priority for modern Egyptology. It's a little sad because I'm sure that had Petrie had access to such tools,
even just that number looks so much better. It just looks better. It looks 1,000 times better.
about incredible ancient objects.
It's like an echelon
Here is what
higher.
he wrote about this box in 1891's Illahun.
It just looks
Kahun
so
and
completely
Garok.
different. And it's just 2
Quite.
seconds.
The sarcophagus is perhaps the finest piece of
I guess you
mechanical
probably feel that
ever
way with
executed in
131
such a
and
hard
129. Yeah.
The
You'll
form
get
is
there,
quite
man.
unlike
Your runs
that
are good,
of any
buddy.
other coffin known, having a wide lip all
It's a
around.
matter of time, persistence. That's what
Another
we're,
strange
dude, I think that's what we
bottom
need,
is
like,
of varying thickness,
just
with the
persistence
inside
now.
depth being equal all over. The outside depth slopes down nearly 4 inches from end to end. As the sides are cut square with the top and the floor is level, the ends all lean over. and
Obviously,
the top
skill
slopes.
helps with
In short, the whole thing is
consistency.
tilted by standing on a sloped
Yeah,
block.
exactly. That's, dude,
The
exactly,
surface,
man.
though not polished, is smooth ground to an impalpable fineness.
Isn't that wild?
And most exquisitely flat. For instance, along the top length of 106 inches, the error from a straight line are an average of 7/1000ths of an inch of error. On the ends, both 50 inches long, the errors are an average of 4/1000ths of an inch. The errors of parallelism are also very small. The north end is 50.053.
I
and the
gotta
south end
lock in on my dark rooms. My
0.07,
dark rooms are
or a
shit.
50th of an inch of difference on a 106 inches length. The curvature of the planes is almost nothing. Over the length of 82 inches, the east side hollowing 5 and the west side bulging 0.002, a difference which is probably covered by the errors of measurement owing to a slight tilt of the sarcophagus sideways. The skew of the planes of the inside is 5/1000ths on the west and 7/1000ths on the east, which again may be confounded by the slight tilt of the whole sideways, but it is almost inappreciable in any case. Lastly, after straightness, flatness,
Please.
and
Oh,
parallelism,
what?
there is the question of ratio between the dimensions, or accuracy of proportions. This is far more difficult.
Yeah,
and it
man, we've had a
requires
bunch.
all
We've
the
had like
previous
maybe,
accuracies, and in addition, a truly
I don't know,
divided
5 or
scale,
6.
and
We've
an
had
irreducible
2.
truth of work, since nothing can be
We
corrected
added
by
2
removing materials.
big room tragedies.
This is indeed
We're at
a brilliant
9.
piece of
The
skill
counter's in the
such an
bottom left
attractive
corner of the
field.
stream, you probably saw.
It would be desirable to level up the sarcophagus and then measure it.
Yeah,
more
9
accurately. Planes
passing
are as
away
nearly
in the
vertical
big
as may
room
be,
on a
for doubtless some errors
on
have
a
come in the
PV
course of
pace.
measuring it in its present slanting position. End quote.
hope entering the
This
big room of
passage,
survival.
Petrie is
And most
basically
have had a lot
admitting
like
that
really
he
high health.
didn't have the ability to accurately measure the degree of error or the margin of error.
No
in the
worries,
box,
man, no
When he
stress.
says that the quote difference is probably covered by the errors
No
of
worries,
measurement,
broski.
end quote. It's utterly remarkable to think that no matter how old you think this artifact is, that we did not have the technology available to accurately measure it in the 19th century, only 120 to
Yeah.
150 years ago. Copper chisels
Since
and pounding
141.
stones, indeed. One other fact
With
to
this
ponder on with this
mainframe.
box and with the chamber
The
itself
point I'm saying is that I
they
should
are
keep
all
going
very
because
well
it could be
aligned
any
to the
run.
cardinal
It could
points
be any
of the
run.
compass. How exactly was this alignment
why it's
managed
there.
in antiquity? We're more than 25 feet down inside the bedrock. There is no way to see the stars from up here, so I'm not sure what technique we can attribute to the supposedly primitive ancient Egyptians in order to accomplish this feat. Maybe it was just luck, or maybe it's yet another sign that there was far more going on from a technological perspective in the distant past than we currently
I agree, bro.
I certainly can't explain it, so if you have any ideas, please do leave a comment below.
I
Now,
agree.
before I get into explaining why I don't believe this box, nor any of the other
Man, we're gonna be
granite
entering.
blocks are made up
Will
of
we
sheer
enter
polymer or
double
some
digit
ancient concrete,
tragedies?
let's return to the ceiling
no.
of the room itself with its arched granite
I didn't think it
slabs.
would get to 9 so quickly.
If you guessed that the other ancient Egyptian site with this feature was the Pyramid of Menkaure at Giza, then a gold star for you. Petrie himself noted the similarity between the chambers in these structures, and given that the Menkaure pyramid
Dude, we've
generally
had like
contributed
a
to the
lot of
fourth
them.
dynasty,
I passed
it
away
seems to
literally
throw
the
whole
last
Middle
frame
Kingdom
before
dating
entering
of
the
this
vents
site
again.
at Lahoun into
Like
some
real
question,
tragedies,
although I
like, just
personally think that
so
both of these
tragic.
constructions could be significantly older. Here you can see the arched ceiling inside the chamber of the Pyramid of Menkaure on the Giza Plateau, and this footage was taken several years ago on an earlier trip of mine to Egypt. It's interesting that they went to the trouble to do this because just like at Lahoun, this chamber has been carved from the bedrock beneath the pyramid, and it was then lined with what seems to have been a very accurately arched ceiling. and although it's not there anymore, there once was a precision-carved granite box housed in this chamber beneath the Pyramid of Menkaure. It certainly does make one wonder about any possible connections or original functional purpose for both the shape of the room and perhaps of the box.
So now I want to get into some of the reasons why.
Why
I
this
don't
slow
think this
pause?
box
Like,
or
why?
Any of the granite artifacts, or even the limestone artifacts for that matter, in Egypt are made from some form of geopolymer or poured aggregate. Now, I wanted to talk about this because, you know, I know there's been a really long documentary that's come out recently on this topic, and I wouldn't be exaggerating to say I probably had more than 100 comments about people asking for my opinion on this, or that they're just stating that that's how this stuff was all clearly done, that it was all, you know, melted down and then reformed and repoured. I don't think that's the case. I'm not saying it's impossible. In fact, I think the geopolymer theory does have some merit and some promise, particularly in South America. Sites like Tiwanaku in particular, I know there's been some studies done there, but I really am still quite skeptical about it. I think it's got a long way to go, and you know, as with any theory like this that's claimed to know,
Come on,
shape,
man.
and know how it was done,
Get fucked.
it has to overcome
Get
all
fucked.
the aspects of the problem, and it has to address all of the challenges with the problem.
It's so
Now,
dumb.
that said,
Like, I
do
hate
hope
this
that there
stupid
is more
game.
legitimate scientific studies and experiments and work done in this area.
Get absolutely
You know,
fucked.
who knows? Maybe they'll be right. Maybe you'll one day be able to buy a bag of aggregate.
Whatever. It was moot anyways. It was probably gonna pass
I
away
certainly
anyways.
have my doubts, but before you write that
Fucking
comment
dumb.
saying that you know how it was done and it was done with geopolymers, at least listen to the other side of this argument as I explain some of the reasons. First of all, we have quarries and we have unfinished works. We almost have in Egypt examples of the work from the quarry to the shaping to the finished product. We have examples of almost every phase of these things, whether you think it was done with pounding stones and copper chisels, or you know, with advanced tools and technology, which I think there's certainly a case to be made for some of the objects. When it comes to granite, I mean, some of the best examples we have are in the Aswan quarry, in the granite quarry there. We literally have stones that are in the process of being shaped and pulled out of the bedrock. Most famously, we have the unfinished obelisk there, but it's not the only stone that's in the bedrock that is being shaped and it is being removed from the quarry. Now, if you were just there to either melt the stone and collect it and somehow reset it, or you were just looking to grind it into a powder, you wouldn't be shaping those stones out of the quarry. We also have unfinished items. For a good example of this is the box that sits in the hallway of the Serapeum. There's also a couple of other unfinished boxes there. You can clearly tell from this box that it still has a lot of work to be done to it. And for that matter, we actually have hammering tool marks on those boxes. They have been worked on with some form of iron chisel or some form of chisel. We literally have the tool marks in the stone, and we know that there are other boxes in that.
Are we back? Is it better? Fuzzy stat still?
Being done on them with tools of one
wow,
form or the other
insane.
in order to get them into that shape.
It's good now.
This is also the case for a lot
Thanks,
of the
man.
limestone blocks that are used in large
Thanks,
Egyptian
buddy.
construction projects. For example, the pyramids. I've heard
Thanks,
it said
bros.
by a lot of people that, you know, the blocks that were made up in the pyramids or the casing stones of the pyramids were made by some form of geopolymer. It's just not the case, because we have quarries for that stone. If you look behind the second pyramid, the pyramid of Khafra, at the back where the hill has been carved
Yeah, I'm gonna
out,
play for about a half an hour more.
you see there's square blocks.
Then
in the
I'm gonna
ground
go out and enjoy the
showing
day.
where they've quarried blocks out and they've cut them
I'm going
off.
to
They're in
brush
that
my
shape,
teeth,
and then
floss
they've
my
been used
teeth.
in the construction of the pyramid.
I'm gonna shower.
Secondly, and this is kind
Enjoy
of
the
just a
sun,
logical
enjoy the
point,
day.
It's the fact that every stone is a different shape and size, and this applies more to the giant building projects
be
than
nice.
it does to sort of single piece objects. But in the case of things like the pyramids or like the Valley Temple, for example, every block is a different shape and size, and this is also the case for the casing stones on the pyramids. Not just the internal stones, also the casing stones are all individually shaped. This presents quite a big problem for the geopolymer theory.
Sun's more nice.
Because you have to make a mold for every single stone. It just doesn't
Yeah, I'll
make
probably
any
be
sense.
playing
So
this tonight,
take the case
probably.
of the Great Pyramid, there's something like 2.3 million blocks
Or tomorrow
of
during the
limestone
day.
used in its construction. If you were doing that with a
But I decide,
geopolymer,
I've,
you
like
had
in
to
this
make
grind,
2.3 million
I've
molds
made sure to
before
always
it
put
doesn't
myself
make sense.
first. If I'm
We use
hungry, I
geopolymer
stop
in
playing, I
modern
eat.
construction
If
today
I'm
with bricks
thirsty,
and
I
things
stop
like that,
playing.
but typically you'll get
I
one
drink
mold,
water.
and you might make
If I need to
millions and
fucking
millions
brush
of
and floss
bricks
my
from that
teeth,
one
I do
mold,
that.
and all of the blocks that are used in construction are of the same shape and size. Thirdly, is that we have tool marks, and we
Because
have
otherwise
machine
you can
marks.
turn into
We
friggin'
have both
Smeagol.
I guess the
you know,
primitive
like my
style
precious.
of tool marks and machine marks that I think were done by the dynastic Egyptians. But
You
we
just lose your
also have
mind and your
advanced
health
tooling and
for
machining
this
marks that
this
come from some
goal.
of the more precision objects, the granite objects, the stuff that I think may have come
Like
from
Bongo
the early
June's
period.
profile pics. I
Now,
think it's
that
Smeagol
just
wearing
doesn't- I mean, if you're casting this or you're making these
a Mexican
these
sombrero.
objects in a mold, why then do you need to
Jeez.
cut them with a massive circular saw? We see examples of sort of massive circular saw cuts at Abu Sir. We see them at Abu Rawash. They're in other places. We have overcuts in the granite, in statues, for example, and in obelisks and some of those types of things.
It's
There are
true,
cuts
man.
where
Like
saws
otherwise,
have
like
gone a little
you're
too far
because
into the
otherwise, because
material and then
like
back
literally,
down.
you
We
don't
also
take
have
care of
the
your health.
tubular drill
Your
marks.
teeth start to
This
rot.
is actually also
You
the
don't
case
floss
in
them and brush them
Tiwanaku.
because you're playing
Even
this game.
On that site, in various locations, you still have machining marks and indications that that rock has been shaped with tools. A fourth reason, and this is something that I think applies to both granite and limestone, but we'll start with granite, is that the geopolymer idea, it's just not how granite
You don't go outside
works,
to see the
for want
sun.
of a better term. Granite, the term granite itself is something of a cover-all term for all of the different types of stone that sort of fall
mean,
under
I
that granite family.
Don't want to make anyone
Every
feel bad, but like the
outcropping of
physical
granite is
activity, not
slightly
everyone
different.
like
You've got
can do
granite,
physical
granite
activity,
diorites,
but
you've got different colours
go
of
out
granite
and
that
get
have
physical
different
activity
levels of
done.
material in them. And granite itself is an aggregate. Inside the granite, when you wash off the stone or you polish the stone, you can see the different types of materials.
important
and
for,
they're
like, the
actually
mental
chunks
health.
of material. There's quartz, there's feldspar, there's mica, there's hornblende, there's all sorts
For
of
longevity,
components that
for
make
strength.
up granite. So if your
Come
idea
back
is that
stronger.
you're melting all of that stone, then how are you forming these
Don't do dishes
individual
like Mark.
lumps
Yeah,
of different
but
types of stone
but I'm
inside
not going
the
for
mix
times
itself?
like
Or if you're grinding the
123
stone, how are
or
you getting
SA
lumps of
train
quartz
SA or
that
whatever
are
you got.
varying different sizes based on wherever the quarry was? For that matter, we also have veins of material that are quite clear on several
Yeah,
granite
that's too
objects.
much
There's a box in the
sacrifice.
Serapeum, or a couple of them actually, that have these large veins of material that are really only possible because that's how the material was formed over thousands or millions of years of heat and pressure in the crust of the earth as it cooled. We also have other types of stone like that. There are even objects made from conglomerate, which is even more of a mix of materials than granite itself. And you might have flint and quartzite and things like that all mixed together. There's an example of just what must have been a massive statue
Great
at
emo.
Tanis. You can see its thumb here. This is made of a conglomerate of different materials. This is not something that can be achieved by grinding up a material or melting a stone and then recasting it. You clearly have
of course.
different forms of
Moonraker's
different
back.
materials in the stone. This is also the case for the limestone. In particular, I'm
Oh,
going
for
to talk
sure.
about the
I'm a
limestone
very
of
clean
the Giza
person.
Plateau because that's where I've seen so many of examples of this. Limestone being a sedimentary stone, the Giza Plateau was once a seabed. So you find quite often, you'll see seashells and fossils and things like that in the limestone. That's at the Giza Plateau. You see this in the bedrock. You also find these fossils in the blocks. And this is how you know these blocks have been taken from the Giza Plateau. They've been carved out. But in both cases, we've got fossils actually in the bedrock. We've got fossils actually in the limestone.
I make my
that
dishes
is in the
squeaky
monuments. And
clean.
again, these wouldn't exist if you were either grinding up the stone to make some sort of powder that then you mixed and poured as an aggregate, and they wouldn't be in there if you were just melting the stone either. And really the last point that I wanted to make about this, and this is kind of just the one theory that I've heard from so many people, is that there was somehow the ancients were creating these giant solar magnifying glasses, these huge lenses that would focus sunlight, and that's how they would melt the granite or they would melt the diorite.
Oh, the double
and
duck.
form these slurries and somehow pour these stones. The idea of creating massive lenses out of quartz that then you would use to melt other
Thanks for being here.
stones that
Thanks for
include
taking interest in my
quartz.
in
Like,
my
first of all,
grind
you
too. I
would
really
ask, how
appreciate
are
that,
you
my
melting
friends.
the
I really
quartz
do.
in the first place to
And
create
caring
these
about
lenses?
how many
And
glass
secondly,
attempts
I
I've
would encourage
had, and
anyone who is
all
really interested
the
in
big
this
way
idea
big
to
room
go to
passway
look at
attempts. I
just
really do
how
appreciate that.
difficult it is to create the
Thank you
large pieces of glass
for being
that
you.
get turned into mirrors for large telescopes. There's really only one or two places in the world that even attempt this these days. But you're quite literally talking about years
Oh,
of
man.
cooling, years of polishing to create these huge pieces of just flat glass that then get covered and turned into a mirror. You almost have a high degree of precision that's required to create something that's convex enough to then focus sunlight and create a magnifying glass. This is a seriously high technology undertaking, and I really don't know that there's any evidence for it. apart from the fact that someone needs to demonstrate this, start melting granite and see how far you go. In any case, all I'm really saying here is that I think there are significant hurdles to that theory. There are significant
Thanks, man.
problems with it. I'm certainly not saying that I definitely know it wasn't done.
I think it's
really do
entertaining
hope
because,
there's
I
more
mean,
experimentation done, and maybe I'll be proven
it's
wrong.
very
I'd be happy to
intense.
if we-
It's very
if we
intense
get to a
level in
point where we can
gameplay
say we definitely
required.
know how this
The
is done.
intensity is very
I just
high.
think there are significant, not only practical problems.
I like
with the theory,
watching
but
high
also logical
intensity.
ones. When you look at the evidence that's on these sites, you look at the evidence in the quarries, and you look at the geology of the stone itself. It's just not how it works. So I just encourage everyone to keep.
I mean,
an
I'm not
open
that
mind. It's always
consistent,
good
but
to explore all of these alternative theories, but then you've got
It's
to put
whatever.
them against the test of sort of logic and look at the evidence that's at hand. Okay, so coming back to this remarkable precision box that's underground the pyramid at Lahore, where do I think this leaves us? Well, once again, I think it's possible that we're looking at a case of inheritance, of renovation, and of reuse, and an underground structure that is possibly far older than Orthodox history would have us believe. Once again, we see a case of some tremendously advanced technological sophistication found beneath the ground. In this case, in the tunnel system and in the room and the box that are made from granite. Once again, we see that these underground structures have a very low technology work that's built on top of them, in this case, a mud brick pyramid. Can we really confidently say that the work below the ground happened at the same time as that above it? Remember that the primary method of dating these sites and relating them into the story of history is by the writing that is found on them, or on objects in them. While Petrie did find a 12th dynasty limestone stellate down here, one that is now in a museum, there are no inscriptions to be found anywhere on the granite, not on the chamber and not on the box itself, which was also found entirely empty. If I had found this place as an Egyptian king, and I found it to be profound, I might have claimed it and used it for my purposes. It's just human nature.
What?
After
How
all,
did he
we
pass away?
discovered this site in modern times thanks to Flinders Petrie. We have renovated it, and today we
Oh,
reuse
that's
it
pretty
for
good.
our own purposes. And
The
not as a tomb,
kookaburras have
but
started.
rather
Oh
as a
no.
tourist attraction.
That's the most Australian thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I don't think I've heard anything more Australian than that. That's fucking hilarious, bro. Holy shit, that's funny. That's ridiculous, bro. That's like
So there
me
it is.
saying,
There's
oh,
another
you know,
just wonderful precision
all the
granite
Canada
box
geese,
that's
there
beneath
they
the
are,
Mont
honking.
Pyramid. I was very happy to get the chance to go there. I've
Canada
also
geese
given
are
some
fucking
thoughts
shit
on
up
why
again.
I don't think this was made from a geopolymer, although I'm sure I'll see
'Cause they do.
Plenty of contrary opinions to
They
that
fucking
in the
shit.
comments
They
section.
fuck a lot
I
of
hope
shit
you all
up.
enjoyed the video. I wanted to say just a massive thank you to everybody that supports the channel. You guys are really the only reason that I'm able to continue making and producing these videos, so thank
More
you
like
very
they
much.
just poo on everything.
Anyone that's interested in supporting the channel, all the details
attack
are on my
people in
website. It's
parks.
unchartedx.com/support. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've got a lot more content planned for this year, and I'll see you all in the
There's a moose kicking the fence down. Yeah, that's true. That is true. That is true. That could happen. That honestly could happen. There's a moose kicking.
Hello everyone and welcome to Uncharted X. My name is Ben and this is part 2 of my series looking at the evidence for forms of ancient high technology. Part 1 is worth a watch before this if you haven't seen it already. In that video we set up some of the context around these claims for ancient high technology, how they correlate to the story of history as we know it, and
That's
then we
hilarious,
dived
mood.
into the evidence for ancient machining.
No, that's funny.
In this video, we're going to look at another category of evidence for ancient high technology, the one that I think is the most convincing. that
Haven't
of
slept
precision.
yet, and the kookaburras have
The
started.
nature of precision bears some explanation, as while it's a word we all know and hear pretty frequently, it certainly gets used constantly as a marketing term, precision this or precision that. It's a concept with some really far-reaching consequences. Our entire modern world is built on precision. We are constantly
Haven't slept yet,
surrounded
and the
by its
kookaburras have
application.
started.
From the engines
Yes,
in our
thanks,
cars, to
man.
the aircraft that we
I think I
fly
put a
in, to
limit.
the
I
electronics that are
put a limit
omnipresent in
because the
every single
spammer, dude.
device that
I've
we
got to
use,
reduce the limits.
watch,
I put a limit on myself too. I think I
Without
limited to
it,
5
modern
redemptions per
civilization
stream or
simply
something or
wouldn't
some shit.
exist.
I gotta see.
Our way of life is the direct result of
Says
the
I
relentless
ran out of
pursuit
redemptions.
precision. These days, we take the benefits of precision for granted. For example, the mass-produced and pervasive
It's whatever, man.
semiconductor
Text-to-speech
microchips
really
that
let
are
me
in all of
down.
our devices, from
The world
dishwashers
let
to
me down.
phones and computers. These all
Not you.
contain millions of transistors that are packaged in tiny, power-efficient silicon footprints. These tiny transistors
why we
are
can't
assembled
have
in a
nice
process
things.
that's measured on the nanometer scale, which is to say measured in the billionths of meters. And yes, that's billion with a B. The width of a helium atom is measurable on this scale, coming in at around 0.06 of 1 nanometer. I recently read a book called The Perfectionists: How Precision Engineers Created the Modern World, written by Simon Winchester. It was recommended to me by Philip Adams in a brief email discussing the precision of the Serapeum. In this book, Winchester describes the rise of the modern pursuit of precision, beginning with its origins in the 18th century in England with the birth of accurate
Please.
chronometers and developments
Please.
in cannon manufacturing for the Navy, and also in the progression of the steam piston engine. All of a sudden, it started to become very important to be able to manufacture precision surfaces with low tolerances, like pistons and cylinders, such that pressurized steam didn't just leak out and could be made to do actual work. It also turns out that when the barrels of cannons are accurately bored out and rifled, which requires both the solid cast cannon and the tool that's boring it out to be held rigidly in place, they are far less prone to exploding randomly and far more likely to shoot straight. Before this development, naval cannons were made by casting the molten iron into its rough shape, including the hollow space for the barrel, and then they would fire the cannon while it was still cooling and pretty much just hope for the best. It was in small but significant
double
leaps
duck.
like this that modern precision manufacturing was born. From this point on, precision drove the Industrial Revolution, and its applications seemed
Oh,
endless.
come on, please.
Modern engines are much more powerful and compact today, thanks to the precise
Oh my
flatness
God,
of cylinder
man.
heads and the low tolerances of pistons, rings, and balls, as well as the mechanical precision of all of their other parts. We enjoy the godlike ability to travel halfway around
Alright,
the
like
world
20 more
in a
minutes,
matter of hours by
kookaburras.
zipping through the
20 more minutes
stratosphere
and then
at
I'm
the
gonna
speed
sign
of
off.
sound, even though we often complain bitterly about it, all thanks to precision. Mankind has the ability to send humans into space without instant death, and to even bring them back again, all thanks to precision. Modern firearms rely on precision-made parts and ammunition, as before we developed this capability, gun parts were handmade and had to be hand-filed to fit into
Roosters are
weapons.
roosters.
Before this, misfires,
I
jams,
think
or
he means like
malfunctions were
alarm
very
clock.
common. Although, on the positive side, I
I
suppose
think.
wars were
I
really
understand.
harder to
I know
fight
what he
back then.
means. Maybe.
Ultimately,
The ones that wake
application
you
of
up.
precision in warfare led to the development of nuclear weapons, and now us talking monkeys have the ability to
Like he
uncork
means that they're
Armageddon
both
without the
cocks.
assistance of any space rocks or burps from the sun. So I guess it's not all good news. Clocks, watches, and other mechanical devices got
Yeah, they started at
smaller
the same
and
time,
more
people. It's
accurate,
morning in
and
Australia.
eventually the microelectronic and semiconductor
Yeah, they start at the
industries
same
were born.
time.
Our civilization progressed
Yeah,
from
it's
measuring
it's like
precision
fucking
in
5
units
a.m.
of
or some
tenths
shit, or
of
3 a.m.
inches
or
in the
whatever. 4 a.m.
1700s,
5.
right down to the nanotechnology of today that
I'm
can
so
be
lucky.
measured by the
People from all over
diameter
the
of
world watch
individual
me.
atoms. Why
Thank
did
you.
we do this?
Thank you all.
Why did we go to all of the trouble, expense, and effort to develop
Like, I'm
and
just
keep
so
pushing back
blessed.
the boundaries of
Thank you,
precision?
man.
This question may seem obvious, but it reveals one of the
5:30, I'm a
fundamental
legend.
aspects of precision, and that is its relationship to function. We develop these expensive capabilities because they gain us notable functional benefits in their application. Inventing the
Poland,
capability
Australia.
to create hard surfaces that are perfectly flat to within 1/20th the width
What?
of a human hair is a difficult and expensive thing to do. Developing the capability to even measure such precision is
Yeah.
equally
Oh, I understand what you mean
expensive,
now.
if
Yeah,
not
yeah.
more so. It requires calibration, and none
Cool,
of it
man.
comes naturally to us. You can't see this level of precision with your eye. You can't feel it with your hand.
My
You
aunt
need
is in
sophisticated,
Warsaw right now,
calibrated, and expensive metrology
living there with
instruments
her
in order to do so.
Polish
We
husband
simply
that she
don't
met
create precision
working in
manufacturing
Poland
capability to
as
this
a
level
air flight
for
attendant.
any other reason than function. We don't develop it for ceremonial purposes, nor do we
I have not
develop
been to
it for
Poland. I would love
artistic
to go to
purposes.
Poland. I would love to go to Warsaw.
However,
Nice,
once
yeah.
we have this type of precision manufacturing
Thanks, man.
capability, it can be applied
My
to
dad
all
went.
sorts of end products.
I've
Just
been
consider
to
a couple of
Prague.
examples from the modern age.
I know it's not Poland.
Take the reductive process, like 3D CNC milling machines, or an additive process, like
Your people are
3D
that's
printing.
nice. Yeah, they're
Whether
awesome.
we are making
Amazing.
artwork or machine parts,
They are the
it's
realest,
the process itself that
kindest,
provides the precision.
realest.
The process
smartest,
was developed in the first place so that we
most
could gain the
skilled.
functional benefits of that precision, but then we can apply it to pretty much anything we want to do with the process.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this
yeah,
is
I
an
know, I know.
important point to remember when we're looking at the precision
I
that's
don't know.
evident
It's
in
just a
some
city.
ancient
I've been there. I've
objects,
been to
as some of these
like
precision ancient
Estonia,
objects appear more functional
been to
than
St.
others.
Petersburg,
So keep
Russia.
this point in mind as we
Oh,
go through
I
this
know
video.
that's not. It's definitely not what a
Overall, I
Polish
enjoyed
person wants to
Simon
hear,
Winchester's
but
book, as it certainly
I've been to
makes
the
case
yeah,
for precision
Russia,
forming the backbone of the modern world. One thing
Finland,
that I mildly disagreed with was the notion
Netherlands.
that the concept and practice of precision only began in the 18th century. I think it would be
Greece,
more accurate to say instead
Italy,
that the practice was restarted in the 18th century, or that the concept
England.
was only rediscovered at that time by
I have. I've been to
man.
St. Petersburg,
As it
man.
seems clear that at
I've
some
ran.
point,
I've
ancient
ran
men
the
had
streets
a
of St.
pretty damn good
Petersburg.
grip on the concept and application of
It looks a
precision
lot
as
like
well.
it, except there's some like
Although
river
this
canals
isn't
through
something
it.
that you will often see or
But it looks a
hear
lot really
discussed
similar.
by
So, St.
orthodox
Petersburg is
archaeologists,
beautiful, man.
there is tremendous evidence.
But I wasn't
of
there in the
very high
90s. I was
degrees of
there
precision in
in
many
the
of the vast ancient stone
2014.
objects
I was
and
there.
architecture all around the
2013.
world.
2013.
Some of these objects display a level of precision that simply
Budapest,
could not have
cool.
been
What?
accidental, and by its very nature
What will you be
requires
doing there?
sophisticated tools and highly
You don't have
advanced
to
knowledge and
say if you don't
capability
want.
in order to achieve. Although we find neither
Just vacation?
sophisticated tools in the archaeological
I imagine
record,
it'd be beautiful.
nor any records of advanced
baller.
capability in what we know of ancient civilizations, the proof that both existed at some point in the past is incontrovertible. The results of sophisticated tools and the results of these processes are still sitting right in front of our eyes
Isn't it
in
cool?
the megalithic objects and architecture that puzzle and captivate so many people from all around the world.
So, yeah, I saw it
Perhaps
here.
the best example of measured ancient precision is found in a place that I've talked about extensively on this channel, the Serapeum of Saqqara. In terms of smoking gun evidence for ancient high technology, this underground labyrinth and its
I really enjoyed
24
Prague.
huge megalithic
I know it's
boxes
different,
is really at the top of
but
the
it's probably the
list.
same type of
The
reasons why I
precision of
enjoyed
these
it.
mighty
Nice people,
single-piece
cheap
boxes and their
prices,
lids, some of which weigh up to 100 tons,
old
is measured in
architecture
straight lines, in flat
on a river.
surfaces, and in the perfect squareness of corners and relative faces. These are easily understood dimensions of precision, and it's a good place to start our
Good food.
investigation, as we'll move on to the more
Good art, good
complex
music.
evidence of compound curved
Good
surfaces
history.
and three-dimensional proportions of objects like the tiny stone jars and the giant granite statues afterwards. I have a 5-part series of videos dedicated to the Serapeum that's on my channel, so
okay.
I'll be brief here. But if you haven't seen them, please do check out the Serapeum playlist. The link is below in the description. Using a calibrated and expensive precision straight edge, manufacturing engineer Chris Dunn has measured the inside surfaces of a couple of these boxes to be precisely and absolutely flat, to within 1/20th the width of a human hair, or 0.0001 inches, which is the limit of his straight edge. Wherever he moved the straight edge over the flat, mirror-like interior walls of the box, light did not pass underneath it, which it would have if the surface was not perfectly flat. Using a precision square, calibrated to within 5/100,000ths of an inch, or 0.00005 inches, he found the inside faces of the boxes to not only be perfectly square and parallel to each other, but also perfectly square relative to the lid. This is a profound achievement. Remember that this all has been done in massive single-piece granite.
Good food, yeah, I bet.
These aren't separate pieces of granite that are then bolted together, which is
Nice.
how we might construct something like this today.
Prague
And
had good
one
food.
single mistake anywhere would
Hearty
mean you need
food.
to change the entire geometry of the box.
The knee of a
Complexity
pig.
and difficulty of getting this feat perfectly correct, particularly in faces up to 10
Dumplings,
feet apart,
latkes.
really can't be overstated. Now, not
Schnitzel?
only was
No.
this done
No
perfectly
schnitzel.
for one box,
Maybe some
it
schnitzel.
appears to be a feat repeated time and time
Maybe not.
again across many of these boxes. Quoting Christopher Dunn from his article "The Amazing Boxes of the Serapeum," which
Yeah,
you can
Hungarian
find on
food
his
is
website
crazy.
at gizapower.com. Quote, "Think of it as a geometric reality.
Schnitzel,
In order
yeah.
for the lid
Oh,
to be
yeah.
square with the two inside walls, the inside
Blessed
walls will have
animals,
to be
thank you,
parallel
animals.
to one another along the vertical axis.
Schnitzel.
Moreover,
What's
the
the
top
German
side
word?
of the box would need to establish
Schnitzel?
a plane that is square to the sides. That makes finishing the inside exponentially more difficult. The manufacturers of these boxes in the Serapeum not only created inside surfaces that were flat when measured vertically and horizontally, they also made sure that the surfaces they were creating were square and parallel to each other, with one surface, the top,
Come on,
having
man.
sides that are 5 feet and 10 feet apart from each other. But without such parallelism and squareness of the top surface, the squareness noted on both sides would not exist. While it may be argued that modern man cannot impose a modern perspective on artifacts that are thousands of years old, an appreciation of the level of precision found in these artifacts is lacking in archaeological literature and is only revealed by an understanding of what it takes to produce this kind of work. As an engineer and craftsman who has worked in manufacturing for over 40 years and who has created precision artifacts
Sideshow Bob.
in our modern world, in my opinion, this accomplishment
Is
improves
it true that you have a
deserves
tattoo
more
on your chest that says "Die Bart
Nobody
Die"?
does this kind of work unless
No,
there is a
no.
very high
This is
purpose to
German.
the artifact.
It says
Even
"Die
the
Bart."
concept
D.
of this type of precision
Oh.
does not occur to an artisan unless there is no other
Parole
means
granted.
of accomplishing what the artifact is intended to do. The only other reason that such precision would be created in an object would be that the tools that are used to create it are so precise.
I saw that yesterday
they are
on the Daily
incapable of
Simpsons.
producing
Followed the
anything
Daily
less
Simpsons on
than
Twitch.
precision. With either scenario, we are looking at
They
a
play
higher civilization
every
in
Thursday at
history
8
than what
p.m.
is currently accepted.
A recorded
To
episode
me,
of The
the
Simpsons with
implications are
commercials from the
staggering.
90s.
This is why I believe that these artifacts that I have measured in Egypt
Oh,
are
wow.
the smoking gun that proves, without a shadow of a doubt,
Yeah, I
that a
mean,
higher
it was like
civilization that what we have been taught existed
the
in ancient
plot
Egypt.
was kind of already
Evidence
laid
is
out. You understood what was going to happen.
End quote.
Kind of.
The
Yeah, dude.
Serapeum isn't
At-
the
at-
only place that
dude,
one can find
At
precision
Daily
stone
Simpsons,
boxes.
follow.
They're found in
on
many
Twitch.
pyramids and in so-called temples, as well as in other
D-Bart.
underground galleries and tunnel systems like those in the Valley of the Kings.
Yeah, I mean, it was
The
a
Egyptian
dumb
Museum
joke,
also
but
has many examples of precision boxes that have
Daily
been recovered from all over Egypt. The best and biggest of these boxes, however, are still down here in the Serapeum, probably because they're basically impossible to move around down here in these confined spaces.
they're not
The logistics
affiliated.
of
They're,
which
they're
is a
so
topic
you
we'll get
know
into
what?
later in
No
this series,
Twitch commercials
as
on them.
It's also a pretty clear
It's
form of
nostalgia
evidence
central,
for ancient
man.
high
It's
technology.
great with the chat. It's funny.
The Serapeum
Thursday, 8
boxes
p.m.
are also, at least to my knowledge,
Eastern time.
the only boxes that have been measured and tested,
Eastern
at
North
least
American
to
time.
some degree, for aspects of
Minus
high
5 GMT.
That analysis was done by Christopher Dunn on his own initiative, and even then was only performed on a couple of the boxes in the Serapeum and not on all of them. While many of the other precision boxes seem to have very similar characteristics to those in the Serapeum, I can't find any evidence that they've ever been tested this way, even by the relatively rudimentary testing that you can do with handheld precision straight edges,
Cool.
squares, and corner radius dies. I think this fact speaks volumes about the motives
That's
of
cool.
the academics and the institutions that control the access to and the research funding for sites and artifacts like
I don't know.
these.
I've heard that
They
Schnitzel
just
may
don't
actually
seem to
be
that interested.
Austrian.
Yet there are and have been for years now several
what I've heard.
non-invasive techniques and tests that could easily be
Which
deployed
may
in
explain
order to
why
learn
it's
much
German.
more about the true nature of
Austrian
ancient precision
German.
that we can see in these objects.
But I may be wrong.
Handheld precision tools would be a start, but more modern, laser-based metrology tools could
Oh, wow.
be used to determine the dimensions and tolerances over the entire surface of these artifacts. High-definition
Interesting, we do that with
LiDAR-based
Latin and
3D
English.
scanning, or the emerging field
Any
of
legislation?
hyperspectral imaging could be used to dramatically advance our
Even the
understanding
word
of the
legislation
exact nature of
comes from
precision
Latin.
and the construction methods that we use to manufacture boxes like these. Not only boxes, but these techniques could and should be used to model and study many of the precision objects and architecture that are found around the world. It's worth noting that when you look at the various boxes in Egypt, there
That's
is
interesting.
also strong evidence for multiple levels
English
of
goes
technological
to
capability.
Latin and
Although they're always
Czech and
uniformly
Polish goes to
labelled
German.
as sarcophagi, whether it's for people or for bulls, there always seems to be two types of boxes. There are the precision-made ones with straight lines, sharp corners, flat and polished surfaces, and then there are the clearly handmade boxes, which are imperfectly done and still display
So English has a
chisel
lot
and
of
hammer
German.
dressing marks. Although this isn't always the case, in general, the poor quality
Germanic.
boxes tend to come from the later periods, with the precision boxes being attributed to the
Daily
older and
use.
earlier periods. Even the oldest box known, an 8-ton single piece of granite that is under Mastaba 17 at Maidoon, appears to be a precision-made box, and it's not something that's been roughly carved by hand.
Ratuts.
We have here examples of the same backwards progression of
Rathaus.
technological capability, the same contradiction in the story of
Rathaus?
history that is demonstrated
You
in general
actually
by
call it
both
rat
Egypt
house?
when it's held up relative to the rest of the Egyptian civilization. If we can't explain how the dynastic Egyptians made these boxes with what we
House
know
of
their
rats?
primitive
Come on.
capabilities, or with the tools that we have in the archaeological record, does it not make more sense that they might
That's
have
amazing.
inherited these objects? They might have used them for
As
ceremony and
die
imitated them.
Rathaus.
They might have tried to create their own boxes, ones that are explainable
Fitting.
by their tools. And
Council?
are explainable
What?
with
Come
their
on.
known capabilities.
Come on,
Here
dude.
at the site of
That is
Tanis, we have
hilarious,
the two
dude.
types of boxes
That's
actually
fucking
lined up
hilarious.
side by side. One is clearly
Rat.
precision made, and the other is obviously not.
Oh,
They reflect
ratify, I
two different
understand.
levels of
Ratification.
capability and technology, and only one
Yeah,
of these
I understand
matches
the
what we
root.
know about the tools and techniques of the dynastic Egyptians.
Red.
Before I
Oh,
move on,
redemption.
I do want to take a
Interesting.
minute to
I
acknowledge
thought it'd be
and
like
thank Christopher Dunn
ratify.
for his contribution to the world in this field. His book, Lost
Ratify is a
Technologies
pretty
of
funny word
Ancient
if
Egypt,
you're
is,
not
in my opinion,
used to it.
incredibly important work, and I think that it will be
Interesting stuff,
widely
man.
recognized as such in years to come.
Die
So we've
Rathaus.
established that while precision seems to have existed deep in the past, it's only something that our civilization has recently developed and then put to significant use over the last 200 to 300 years. The fact is that it wasn't until after we had begun our own modern voyage down the path of precision that we even had the capability to notice and accurately measure.
Oh
ancient
wow, look at
forms
this
of
guy. This guy knows
precision,
everything.
or to
Not this guy, I
even
mean you,
appreciate the
Bonjour.
sophistication
Ratify.
of the manufacturing
Not linked
techniques
to it
that
at.
were required to
Wow,
achieve.
insane. To
This
Latin.
evidence has been sitting in front of humanity for
Ratificare.
thousands of years,
Wild, bro.
like some sort of coded message sent down through time.
That's really
But it's
cool.
one that we've only relatively recently
Brain
developed
Bongo
the
June.
capability to read. Sir William Flinders Petrie was one of the very first to apply our civilization's
I know, eh?
knowledge of
Streamers
precision
always look
and manufacturing
so
to the
uneducated
objects of
because they
ancient
can't Google
and he
while
did
they're
so to
playing.
various
That's the
degrees
reason.
across his work through the
Kappa.
late 1800s and early 1900s. He
Cognitive.
observed and quantified
I know
the
the word
machine
cognitive.
marks that are left in artifacts, and
Right.
he measured and speculated on the techniques
That's so
required
true.
to manufacture the many ancient stone vases and vessels
Look
that
at dumb
come
streamer.
from the oldest times of ancient Egypt.
Without his Google.
These stone jars, bowls, or other objects are truly remarkable pieces that, by their very nature,
Worn
provide
together,
proof that
wow,
advanced
insane.
manufacturing techniques and precision were alive and well deep in the distant past. Found in the tens of thousands, These vases and objects are today mostly associated with the very earliest periods of ancient Egypt, even the 1st and 2nd dynasties, as well as the archaic and pre-dynastic periods, which is a huge clue right there, as these periods are quite literally considered part of the Stone Age. The range of shapes and materials
Too far
used
back
in the
and it's too
manufacture
slow.
of these jars and vases is both wide and varied. Some are tiny,
I mean, it might be
almost as if
peace,
they're
but I'm too far back.
teasing us with their capability, and some are quite large, but they all seem to display a frankly astonishing degree of symmetry and precision. This jar is one of my favourites, and it seems to have been so precisely made and so well balanced that it can stand upright on its tiny base, almost like an egg standing up on its tip. Many jars seem to be made this way, and while I've not had the privilege of handling them directly in order to test this, I'd like to see anyone try and make these by hand with copper chisels and the known techniques of ancient Egypt. All I can say is good luck. While some vases or jars seem very solid, others are almost ridiculously thin, to the point of transparency, like these examples. In some cases, like this vase that has suffered some damage, we can get an idea of just how thin this material is. Shaping and carving out the inside angles and the inside cavities of these jars, some through very long and narrow necks, and then keeping the material thickness consistent and accurate, is an extraordinarily difficult challenge when working in very
No
hard
glass.
stone. Quoting Flinders Petrie from his article in the 1884 Journal of the
I'll play for maybe like 10 more
Institute
minutes.
of Great Britain and Ireland. Quote, "The finest examples of
Feel that? No, I knew.
technical
Yeah, I
art
was too
are
far
in the
back. I knew it though. It wasn't very
a small,
fast. I
highly
mean,
polished, narrow-necked vase in diorite,
it's
or
alright. Thanks,
rather in
man.
transparent quartz with veins of hornblende, has its neck
Play
only
for maybe like 10,
0.05
15 more minutes.
inches thick. A large vase of cyanite is turned, inside and out, remarkably thin.
You know what was good about that run was the drone shot. Because previously I shot a frame earlier, and I tried to blow up the drone. It's pretty much frame perfect. And I lost too much health. That one I didn't lose any health.
Bowl, 6 inches diameter, is only 1/40th of an inch, or 0.024 inches thick, over its greatest part. Just around the edge, it is thicker in
It was not.
strengthening, but a small chip
No
broken
glass
out of the
opening
body of it shows
occurred
its
on the run.
extraordinary thinness, no stouter than thin card. An alabaster vase of Wanis of the 5th dynasty almost rivals this in thinness, being only 1/20th to 1/30th.
The glass
of an
did
inch
not
thick.
open.
End quote. Working in these brittle and very hard materials, particularly to these tolerances, is a remarkable feat of manufacturing. From granite to diorite to schist,
That would be a
breccia,
darkroom
flint,
tragedy, I think.
conglomerate, quartz, basalt, and even
Yo,
obsidian.
Crown.
These small
What
objects
up?
are typically
What
made
up,
from some of the hardest
Sailor
and
Curse?
most
How are you,
difficult
man?
to work materials you can find.
Thanks,
There is
June.
one vase
Thanks for
that I
asking. It
know
was
of that is
not.
made from corundum. And yes, this is corundum. There are several forms of it. It doesn't
You the
all
king,
look
man.
like
We all the
gemstones.
king. We're all the
And
kings of
corundum
our
is a
lives.
9 on the Mohs scale of
And
hardness.
queens of our
It's the
lives.
hardest substance on Earth next
Of
to
our
diamond.
kingdoms and queendoms.
Supposedly these were all made by hand with basic hand tools, flint or copper chisels.
Not just the rock crystal vessel and obsidian. Imagine. we
Gotta
don't
look up
really
more,
build
man.
up obsidian here in Egypt. It had to be built in Cairo. But imagine these types of the vessel side by side with this kind of.
Analysis of the stone itself reveals further challenges. Many stone types have vastly varying degrees of hardness in the material itself.
Yes, the word
being made
tragedy
up
is
of
a subjective
conglomerate
cutoff,
mixes of different individual
and it's
chunks of
tragic if
various
it's a
materials and
PB
crystals.
pace.
As the piece is being worked,
And we're
cutting
talking like
edges
frames
move
away
from
from
relatively
it
soft
completing.
material into very hard and brittle crystals that would typically shatter rather than cut cleanly when worked. Yet many of these vases are both mind-bendingly thin as well as being finished and polished to a very high level. The technology involved in making these jars is so far beyond clay pottery or ceramics that it's laughable to house them together and say, look, these all came from the same place, so they must have been made by the same people. Some of these jars were, undoubtedly, used as canopic vessels as part of ritual mummification. Why then were they sealed with rough mud and clay lids? These clay lids are still housed and displayed
Oh my
in the
gosh.
museum,
Thank
right
you
next
for
to the
watching
incredible stone jars.
and being here.
Yet how can you say that these are equivalent technologies that came from the same people for a singular purpose? Once again, I think this is strong evidence for inheritance in ancient Egypt. If these jars were truly made to be canopic vessels by the dynastic Egyptians, surely they could have afforded to manufacture stone lids for them. But
Terrible
that's just
fucking
not the
dark
case.
room again.
Some
Like, why am I just so
40,000
bad?
of these vases and jars
I'm
were
so
found
bad,
beneath
man.
the very first pyramid, the step pyramid of Djoser, the first pharaoh of the 4th dynasty of the Old Kingdom. Other objects date back even further, even to so-called pre-dynastic times, like this just beautiful hollow tube of lapis lazuli with a gold sheath. It's housed in the pre-dynastic section in the museum next to bone needles.
I will do
beads,
one more
and
run,
basic
maybe.
pottery. Make
If
no
we get a
mistake,
glass,
this is
or not a glass,
precision
a
object.
mainframe.
It's made from a very hard and
But I
brittle
think we're pretty
material
much done.
that required an advanced capability to create, and that's just the stone part. Even the presence of gold means mining, smelting, and refining. It's an out-of-place object, and it really has no business being housed next to the known products of Neolithic, pre-Bronze Age, hunter-gatherer cultures, and it's just one of the many hidden in plain sight clues to the truth of our history that you can find in the Egyptian Museum. Take a look at this huge granite jar. It's attributed to the Archaic Age. This is very much like the Serapeum boxes. We have here evidence for some very poor and badly aligned early forms of writing that barely scratch the surface of what is essentially a precision object that's made from very hard stone. From observing the markings of tube drills, which I've covered in detail in other videos, Flinders Petrie deduced that the ancients were familiar with rotating
fuck you.
tools. But from analysing the vases and bowls, he realised that they were also familiar with turning the work itself. He concluded that they must have used something that's similar to a lathe, with features like mechanical tool rests, in order to manufacture these objects. Quoting Petrie from his book, The Pyramids and Temples of Giza, quote, "The principle of rotating the tool was, for smaller objects, abandoned in favour of rotating the work, and the lathe appears to have been as familiar an instrument in the 4th dynasty as it is in modern workshops.
Go!
The diorite bowls and vases of the Old Kingdom are frequently
Fuck
met
you,
and show
man.
great technical skill. One piece found at Giza, number 14, shows that the method employed was
Fuck
true
off.
turning and not any process of grinding, since the bowl has been knocked off of its centering, recentered imperfectly, and the old turning not quite turned out. Thus, there are two surfaces belonging to different centerings and meeting in a cusp. Such an appearance could not be produced by any grinding or rubbing process which pressed on the surface." End quote. And here is a further quote from Petrie, this time in his article in the 1884 Anthropological Journal. Quote, "For the use of a hook tool in turning the insides of vases, a very rigid rest or even a mechanical tool holder is almost necessary. But one specimen here shows that the early Egyptians were
Thanks, buddy.
already familiar not only with lathes and jeweled turning tools,
It's pretty
but
fast.
with
I think it's
mechanical
PV
tool
pace.
wheels and sweeping regular arcs in cutting. The diorite bowl of which this piece is a fragment has been turned as a segment of a sphere inside by a tool working from a fixed center in the axis of the lathe.
Could be
The radius
faster.
of
That run could have been way faster.
Having cut this spherical curve, the center of play of the tool was shifted
I think for
about
lag-
5 inches higher and 0.7 inch out of the lathe axis, and a fresh arc
reduce
was struck
lag, I
from
think.
the center of the bowl, thereby cutting out a fresh curve which left a raised lip around the
I've
edge.
seen other people do it.
End quote. Despite this
And I'm
evidence,
used to
and
it.
despite the other clear evidence for large circular saws and tube drills, remember that according to mainstream academics today,
Good question.
the Old Kingdom
I don't think it
Egyptians
does.
did not have access to the wheel. Or
That's
its
a good question, though.
equivalents, of which
I mean, it might
lathes
just
are
it might
an advanced
reduce the
technique
lag.
and still something in vast
overall.
widespread use today in workshops and manufacturing all over the
It's
place.
just for the whole run.
They say
I
this
would start
because
with
there's
cinema,
no
but
evidence for
the
wheel in their writings
the
or in
headshot's
their
really hard to
diaries.
do in
And
cinema.
according to most academics, they didn't have command of the wheel until the second
Irie's run is all in cinema,
thousands
and
of
Hayden
years
King's
after the
is
Old
in
Kingdom,
cinema.
around the time when the Hyksos
They
invaders
each have
showed
one.
up with
I'm not
their
like their
wheeled
movement
chariots.
just like got them
Just as an
138, but
aside, can you imagine the Egyptians
I
when
don't
they
know,
saw
man.
the wheeled chariots of the Hyksos, and then they looked over at their old sleds?
cinema might reduce lag a lot.
No analysis of the objects
Especially
in the,
the
museum
end,
would be
just 'cause there's
complete
so much
without
going
a mention
on.
of the notorious schist disc. This is a very complex artifact, labelled naturally as a jar or a vase, that was found amongst primitive flint knives and copper
Okay,
tools in the
don't
mastaba
skip
of
for
Prince
cinema.
Saba, a royal from the very first
Oh, wow,
dynasty of
insane.
the Old Kingdom. It was
Sure, let's
broken
try it.
and then reassembled. It's been carved from a single piece of
I don't know.
very
I don't know
hard
if I could do that
schist
though,
stone,
bro. I don't know
and
if I
then
can wait like
carefully
this
put
forever.
back together by the
Sorry,
museum
man.
staff. Many people have said many things about
No,
the
it's too much
schist disc,
lag.
and there is lots
too
of
much lag.
speculation as to its purpose. Was it part of a machine? Was it a tool? Or was it just artistic expression and a nice
Straight.
place to put a bunch of
Oh
flowers?
yeah.
I'm less interested in the speculation about its
True.
purpose than I am with the technology that's required to make this piece. Although it's been
Right.
reassembled and it looks a little wonky, this does not seem to be the result of lathe work, but rather these complex curved surfaces have been
No, so
precisely
much
carved
lag,
into
man.
very hard stone and then repeated accurately for each of its wings
Way
in
too
these
much lag.
sweeping motions that the stone makes. It's a masterpiece of stonework, yet supposedly this was created in the very first dynasty of ancient Egypt as nothing more than ceremonial artwork. Now, it's not only the small
Yeah, it
stone
could be some
jars that show
build-up of
evidence
lag or
of
something, I don't
advanced
know.
manufacturing that used the principles of the wheel and then produced precision results. It is also shown in
interesting.
some of the largest objects known from ancient Egypt. So buckle up, because this is where it gets really interesting, as these massive objects take the evidence for advanced technology in vastly
Alright,
ancient
5 more
times
minutes.
to a whole new level.
5 more minutes, and then I'm gonna
I'm
sign
talking
off.
about the
Thank you though.
giant
Thanks for being
columns
here.
and the giant statues that are found across many sites, both up and down the length of ancient Egypt. In terms of pure symmetry and a demonstrated mastery of working in hard stone, the huge single-piece flared columns are really hard to beat. My favourite example is a remnant from this column, shaped from pink granite, found at the Old Kingdom site of the Temple of Bastet. It's hard to describe the stonework here as anything less than pure mastery. Consider that the original quarried block of stone
Thanks
must
for
have
streaming.
been
Yo, thank you,
wider
man.
than the widest part
Thanks,
of
bro.
the flared end of
I
the
do as well, man.
and then worked down to the width
Thanks,
of
bro.
the column body on a perfectly aligned center line, then shaped and finished with accuracy and symmetry. Although this
Yo,
one has
Joe,
been
I'm
broken, it would have
invincible.
likely been more than 40
Yeah,
or
man.
50 feet tall,
Dope
over
emote.
15 meters.
From the
We know
DJ.
that some columns were truly giant, like
Oh my
this one
God.
that's still
I
standing
think I'm
at
done. I
Alexandria,
think I'm done.
which is well in excess
I can't
of
do
that
this
figure.
anymore.
The flares, angles, ridges, and curves on this piece
Let's
all
end on a good
appear
run.
flawless. They are made entirely smooth and well polished, and the entire massive body
Whatever, we
seems to
added
be
2
utterly
big room
symmetrical and
tragedies to
balanced.
our list.
Was this made by hand, do you think, with pounding stones and copper chisels? I just can't imagine how.
That's progress.
To my
That
mind,
is
this
progress.
must be the result of some very advanced tools,
It's the
along
last
with
run.
significant mechanical assistance and
Whatever
guidance.
happens, happens.
Once again, I think objects like this column would be a very easy target for a non-destructive analysis using modern metrology techniques
Alright,
and
let's
high-resolution
focus in.
3D
Alright.
scanning.
Thank you for
It
being here.
wouldn't even be that expensive to do.
Thank you very much.
The hard part would be gaining permission for the test. It's a good thing granite is such a durable substance, I suppose, as I can only hope this analysis does happen at some point in the future, and I'm reasonably confident that this fragment of truth will still be here waiting for it when it does. One of these columns alone is really a masterpiece, but there is another dimension to their precision in tile, and that is that there are far more than just one of them. Here at the Old Kingdom site of Tanis, you can see the same shaped column ends that we saw at Bastet, although they're more heavily eroded by time and weather. Some huge single pieces of multiple columns still remain here today for tourists to puzzle over. These seem to have been stamped out in ancient times as if they were made in some sort of giant factory. Dozens of these huge single-piece granite columns are known to exist, or have existed.
So for cabs,
And the ones
101.
from the same installation are all typically
No, he's going for
identical.
cabs, 0.
They all feature flared ends
100.
in palm or lotus
1 minute.
shapes. They've all been found on the oldest of Egyptian sites, places like Bastet, Tanis, Saqqara, and Giza.
The results of like 16 pillars, all the same measurements, no extensions and things like that. This reflects that those who were carving these stones, they have a total power. They have control. They want to accomplish something, they accomplish it. All the same measurement. You know how challenging is this? Pillars that's over 5.5 meters. Where do you find 16 pillars? 16 pieces that you can make 16 pillars out of. The crown is a single solid piece with the pillar, not like the Roman pillars. Yeah. The pillars in the pyramid structures are single solid piece. That palm-shaped pillar is very, very challenging. Of course, the piece itself